Do you think school bells are the same all around the world, or do you think they make different noises?
I think they used to be all the same, and then I think they started making them like digital.
Oh, and then you can change the
Different chimes for announcements for certain periods ending. Yeah, good old. But you can put a school bell in anything, and no one questions it because you're watching and you're like, "That's a school bell."
It's ingrained into us.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it is that time again that we are headed back in history. To my right, to my stage left, he is my co-host. He is the pickles to my pulled pork. I am the interpreter to his Shohei Ohtani. And he is
I've never gambled a day in my life.
He is
gambling. What is that?
He's also the Joseph to my Mary Magdalene. That is Professor Chris. Did I use that right? Was Joseph the one that was believing that Mary Magdalene?
Yeah, every time I hear that, all I can think of is that fucking like sound overture that people would do like videos on Reels where it was like, "How'd you make this pie?" He's like, "We don't have an oven." You know how that sounds, Mary? See how it sounds? I baked it from scratch. Oh, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back. We are heading back to the ancient world, to a little place that kind of was a game changer for modern history. And that place is, it's been known by many names. It's been known as Lygos, Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul, Bistanbul.
Bistanbul sounds sick.
When I read that, I was like, God damn it, that sounds good. That's a good name. I actually almost want to name the episode that, but no one would fucking find it in a search engine.
Yeah.
But the combination of Byzantium and Istanbul, hey, bravo.
And Constantinople. The stand.
Oh, there you go. Well, that's also part of Istanbul, I guess.
That's
what they kept the stand for, probably.
Could be. Yeah, this is why writing down the boards took so long. That was like half the time was sitting there trying to figure out how to turn three names into one.
Also, East Rome, Nova Roma, New Rome. I mean, this place was a fucking poppin'.
Yeah.
For a long ass time.
The craziest thing about this is like, I mean, we're technically doing a Roman Empire episode about a city in Greece that was founded by a guy who took over Rome, and it was like, fuck Rome, I got no ties to it, we're moving to Byzantium.
Oh, I'm keeping the name.
Yep.
I'm keeping the Roman name, but we're doing this from the other side of the empire at this point.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, Rome became so vast that once you get so big, you're going to have kind of divisions there. So you actually had kind of what they knew as the Western Roman Empire, which would be more like Italy proper, and kind of going over that direction. And then also the Western or Eastern Roman Empire, which was kind of more Greece, the area going into like Asia and Eurasia and everything. And then also, what's it called? Minor Asia?
Asia Minor.
Asia Minor. Where this actually, some of this is closer to taking place.
Yeah. So, with a little less talk and a lot more action, let's head to Byzantium.
Well, before we get into it, just remember your reminder. I think last time I said read, rate, and I don't know what the fuck people are reading. I said that toward the end of the episode. Rate, review, subscribe to our all of our channels and our social media so you guys know what's coming out in the future. But yeah, Constantinople, originally not Constantinople. It's a city that has a kind of, in true Greek fashion, I think we were just talking about this, it's got a founding myth to it where with most of Greek history, the mythology is so intertwined with the actual facts and their record keeping that it's hard to kind of know where the name came from or where it was founded.
This is all something to me that I have just taken for granted for so long doing a history podcast is we take for granted that the majority of the people, maybe not on the planet, but the majority of people, at least in our country, can read.
Yeah.
So back in this time, that was never even close to like a 50-50 split. Byzantium actually gets close, and Constantinople gets close. I'm sure Alexandria was close, where all the residents were literate and could read and write.
That's insane.
But yeah, back in history, other than that, there weren't a lot of people that could read and write in those days.
Yes.
So
you were like a 1%er if you had the ability, and you not only have to have the availability to learn that skill, you would also have to have the mental capacity to learn that skill. So you had to, stars had to align.
So when these histories get written, they're not necessarily written with the most accurate thing in mind. I kind of think they were probably written in a way to where the layman could understand what was going on and maybe add a little fanciful like glitter to it.
Yeah.
To kind of keep them, because again, their attention span probably wasn't great because they couldn't read or write. So you got to throw some glitter on some things.
If you had the ability to add some prestige, a little pizzazz to something, you're going to do it.
Why not? Yeah.
So kind of the founding myth for the city is originally it was kind of going back in history. They were able to tie it back to this established settlement called Lagos. And the location of where Constantinople, now known as Istanbul in modern day Turkey, actually lies, is it is at the opening of what's called the Bosphorus Straits. Now, the Bosphorus Straits are the strait. It's not a river, but kind of. It's essentially just an area almost between two pieces of land in which it connects via waterway the Sea of Propontis to the Black Sea. And the Sea of Propontis is basically the opening that then flows out into the Aegean and then into the larger Mediterranean.
I must have been using a wrong map, or maybe it was a different name. I got the Sea of Marmara.
It was also called Propontis. Okay. It's both. It's the same. Sea of Marmara, Sea of Propontis.
Well, and isn't the difference between a strait and a river? A river has like a lake or a beginning of its water flow.
That's true. It's not just kind of water that flows.
Yeah. Whereas a strait is kind of just like an expressway to get from one sea to another.
It's also ocean water, correct? Because it all connects to the sea at a certain point.
True.
So being in this location, the crazy part that we never also really think about from a historical perspective is it's very rare for a city or a town to be founded now. Like, I don't even know how you would have to go and get incorporated and do all that kind of stuff. The city would have to have a reason to be in a place, like if an industry sprung up there. That used to happen all the time.
Yeah, it's how we get steel cities in different places like that. You'd have plants or anywhere that was building that needed a lot of people.
When people first settle a place, they're usually not going to settle far from where they actually landed because they're also going to have communication. The sea was kind of their bread and butter. It was their way of communication and kind of their lifeline. So what becomes Constantinople is actually founded right at the opening of the Straits of Bosphorus. And at that section, it's not super wide. I mean, it's wide enough for modern shipping and everything like that to use, but it's close enough that you would have access to essentially any trade coming in and out of the Black Sea, coming down into the Mediterranean. You're going to be a big stop on that. So it's going to go ahead and enrich your city even more. The other part of it is that where they decided to build the city, out on this little strait, right when you get into the Bosphorus Straits, if you were to keep going past the city and then hang a hard left, you come to this thing called the Golden Horn. And the Golden Horn was basically a harbor. Why are you laughing?
I think Canadians call penises horns.
Do they?
Yeah. And
Okay.
So whenever I hear Golden Horn, I just think it's just a
Do
big
they call it a
golden
horn on
penis.
Letterkenny or whatever it's called?
Yeah, he's pulling on his horn.
Gotcha, okay. So the Golden Horn was basically this natural harbor that was the mouth of, two rivers that basically gave this city protection on three sides of it. So you have everything you need from an ancient perspective in order to establish a city. You have an area that you're able to protect. It's in an area that's going to be open to a lot of trade. And you're also in a position where once you've established this, you also can go ahead and be sending out trade to other locations where you're going to become a hub.
The other nice thing about it, too, is on the one land side, which to find a defensible place that has water on three sides seems fucking nuts. On the land side, it was very mountainous. So, and it has something to do with where the tectonic plates were shifting right around there that have kind of created almost like a bottleneck in with mountainous regions to where they could eventually put some walls that we're going to talk about later. But it, to me, sounds like if you were walking around and you got to choose any, I would say if I had to create a fortress today, I would put it right there.
Yeah.
It feels like the best place in the world
views
that you
had to
could
be
put it.
spectacular.
Yeah, the views had to be incredible, but just as a defensible place, if you even have a half-lit navy and some of the shit that they came up with to block out the Golden Horn harbor and all that kind of stuff, it just seems like it's so impenetrable. And this Constantinople survived 17 sieges.
Yeah.
That's a lot of sieges to survive. It's an incredible number that this place was able to defend. And the reason that it goes from Constantinople just to cover the Byzantium era, and we'll talk about why this is the Byzantine Empire, even though it was the Italians.
I hate having to switch between those two.
Yeah.
It's Byzantium and then like having to switch to Byzantine.
Well, the reason, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the founding of Byzantium, allegedly, all this is allegedly, happened in 667 BCE by a guy named Byzas. He asked the Oracle of Delphi where he needed to raise a city, and I think the Oracle of Delphi was blind. I don't.
There were a lot of oracles at that point. I
Yeah.
don't know what it required. Anytime someone says oracle, I just see that scene off 300 where the chick's dancing around.
Maybe didn't he have his eyes scratched out or something like that? Is that why I thought of that?
Who did?
The Oracle in 300.
No, that was just the dude, one of the dudes.
Okay. But this Oracle of Delphi told him to go northeast across the Aegean Sea, and he actually found what he was looking for. What the Oracle told him for was to find land opposite of the City of the Blind. And that sounds like a very vague thing that a guy named an Oracle would probably tell you. But Byzas goes ahead and
Very
sets out.
specific.
Yeah, he sets out across the Aegean, and he runs into these people called the Chalcedon colony, and it was on the Asian side of this mouth of this Sea of Marmara, in the Bosphorus Strait. So as he finds them, he looks across and he sees this area that would become Byzantium that may have been Lygos before, or vice versa, however it works. But he sees that it has these three sides that are covered by water. He sees the mountainous terrain in front of it, and he realizes that the people living in Chalcedon, or whatever it was across the strait from it, had to have been blind to not realize that that would have been a better place to put a city.
Okay, I was waiting to see. I was like, do you think he pulled over at Chalcedon and was just like, hey, stopping off to top off for supplies and everything? The first guy he actually meets is a blind guy sitting on the dock, and he's like, and he's just tired of traveling. He's like, that's a sign.
No
That's
way.
a sign.
No fucking way. I found a blind guy? Yeah, perfect. But he decided that that's where he would put Byzantium, the city of Byzantium in. He raised the city. And the changeover that happens comes about because the Roman Empire had split into basically fours. The Roman Empire was set up, it was east-west mostly. There were two rulers. Constantine was the ruler in the east, and the ruler in the west was...
It's not Seppius, right?
Linesius.
Linesius. Linesius. Nope, it's not Linesius. How do you say it?
Linesius?
Sure.
Licinius.
Licinius. There you go.
Licinius kind of ruled the west, and these four principalities were broken up into twos, and the east and the west went ahead and fought for the Roman Empire. And Licinius ends up losing at a battle that was kind of like their civil war at Nicomedia. And
Was it the battle of... There was one that was the battle of Chrysopolis? Chrysopolis.
it's going to be so tough with some of these names. It could have been that too. But long story short, Constantine ends up winning. He takes Licinius into custody, and Licinius is like, yeah, just let me out, man. I'm not going to do anything. That's fine. And
You won. We're gentlemen here.
yeah, so Constantine lets him out, and then he gets a little paranoid a year later, and he sends some spies over to kill Licinius and to kill Licinius' son. So he didn't want a challenge.
It's a slow burn.
Yeah, but to the victor go the spoils. Constantine is able to take over the empire. There was kind of a feeling that Rome, the shine had come off of Rome a little bit. He looked at it as a place where there were so many backroom fixers that it would be tough to continue the Roman Empire in a city that was just kind of so corrupt.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Roman Empire at this point is so vast again that it's been split up into these different sections. We're already in the ADs at this point.
We were talking about this before the episode. We did Constantine a few weeks back.
Oh, Hannibal
A few weeks back. And I just thought that this had to have been a close time period. This is fucking 600 years later, 500, 600 years later that this happened. So Hannibal and everything that happened during that part of the Roman Empire is 500 plus years in the past from where we are now.
Yeah, that's how long that empire just endured and expanded and everything. So
the United States has been around for like 300 years.
Yeah, yeah. So as you have the two halves, Constantine's looking at Rome, like you were saying, and it had been in operation as the central hub for the Roman Empire for so long that, like you said, the power structures that were there were so entrenched that there was no way to remove them. People that were in power, that were influencing decisions behind the scenes, there was no way for one guy to go in there and essentially fix all of the problems and get that system out of there. So he's like, fuck it, we're going to go ahead and start over here fresh, and this is where I'm going to be doing the ruling shit from. However, what I will be taking from Rome is I'm going to be packing up a whole bunch of the structures and the art and all that good shit, and I'm bringing it with me to this place that's going to be known as Constantinople, named after Constantine. He also calls it Nova Roma, which is basically what they consider as New Rome, and it also became known as, I'm sure not by the Romans, but in our day, East Rome.
Yeah. The reason that we have the changeover, the reason that this isn't so called the Roman Empire and it's called the Byzantine Empire is simply two things. They weren't in Rome anymore. They were in Greece because
We've only applied it to that name as well.
Yeah.
Since historians have applied it, I don't even know if they considered it what they would be the Byzantines at that point. I think that's a historical name added to it because it was from Byzantium. They probably just knew it as a continuation or the new Roman Empire, some shit like that.
Oh, well, and I think that's what they had called it, but we had to assign it a new name because it's technically in Greece. And the other part about it was all of the business dealings and all the governmental work that was done in Rome and that was done in the previous Roman administration all spoke Latin. Whereas now that we're in Greece, he changed the governmental language to Greek.
Yeah.
So you have the Roman Empire speaking Greek in Greece. We're going to call it Byzantine Empire because it's just sort of a shell of itself. And technically, the Roman Empire, the West Rome that ended up losing, there was still a portion that was considered Western Rome where the Catholic Church stayed in Italy. Whereas we'll find out later on, Greek Orthodox, this is where the schism happens between the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church.
Christianity, basically. Full-blown Catholicism versus Christianity. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, it was because they were both Catholic, basically.
Yes.
But, and we'll talk about the schism that changes it, but it's actually the Romans fall under Catholicism, got it that time. And then the Greeks and the Byzantines created something not very different called Orthodox.
Okay. I've always kind of wondered, because you always hear like Greek Orthodox Church and like the Holy Roman Church like that, or Roman Catholic, things like that.
I think orthodoxies are probably just splittings. It's like LDS, like FLDS, reorganized. Yeah, New Coke, basically. Yeah. So we get this just wonderful, wonderful city, Constantinople. Again, the advantageous position of the city, I'm sure he saw, because the war that he fought against Licinius happened fairly close to Byzantium.
Mm-hmm. Well, think of it this way, too. You're getting to basically look at all the shit that you liked about Rome, and now you have a chance to build it and get rid of all the stuff that you didn't like. So you've been using Rome in that area this time as almost like testing, and now you're just like, this is what works here. This is what the people want. This is what we need.
Well, not to mention how much Rome is sort of landlocked, I think, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
So to be able to move to this Bosphorus Strait and have control, and not only that, again, on the other side of Constantinople is the continent of Asia. So
Asia Minor.
you control the trade routes going through there in that spot. And if you're sending anybody across the Black Sea to fight, if you're sending anybody across the other sea to fight, you're right there to be able to be as close as humanly possible to those wars.
You have any of the trade that's coming down from. I was thinking about this, why these centers are so important for trade and so powerful because of that. So you have certain trade routes. It's not like when you look at a map, you're just like, well, they have all this room that they can move over and they can take this path. It's all determined by the geography and how quickly you can get somewhere and how safe that those routes are. So you have these trade routes that are coming all the way from like China, the trade routes from India and all that kind of stuff. It's all moving and it has to get up to where the trade is, and that's going to be Rome up in Europe. As they get to that point from Asia Minor, they get to the other side of the Bosphorus Strait of that little inlet. They look across, and all of a sudden, they're going to go right across to Constantinople, drop off some shit. They're going to get first trade or first pick out of all that kind of stuff. You then have all of the stuff coming from the other side, coming to the Black Sea, and all of these villages, because the Black Sea was essentially a place that you would establish villages because it was close to the water sources. Or essentially not freshwater, but like
Fishing.
Yeah, and fishing and like traffic and everything. So once you get to the Black Sea, you're like, okay, so I can either load up all my cargo on this boat and sail it down and get into the Mediterranean and branch off here, or I can walk my cargo around the Black Sea and continue to do this land travel shit. Fuck that. I'm loading stuff up on a boat. So there was just constant shipping from everywhere within the Black Sea. All of that passed by Constantinople.
When you also have them controlling the mouths of these seas, and if they send out their pretty apt navy to intercept your ships and say, hey, you're not getting by here, but we'll buy all your shit at 80% and you can just turn around and leave.
Yeah, we're going to save you guys the trouble of all that danger, all of those bandits and pirates out there in the Aegean. Why don't you guys just leave our stuff here, or leave everything here at a discount, of course.
Yeah.
And we'll save you the travel time and the cost and the risk associated with that.
You can get back to your wife and kids 5 days faster. Just very advantageous
Months,
for everybody.
Probably closer to weeks, months, faster.
But not only did he have this wonderful positioning, he really just decked this place out. In the new city, he created a city square called the Augusteum. The Augusteum was a place where they could gather for any sort of rituals, sacrifices. They did non-blood sacrifices. I guess there's
an animal based within Greek, not human, right?
I think it was non-blood, so they stopped sacrificing living animals and people to God and started kind of like what the Egyptians did when they would give offerings of
basically like a tribute area. Okay.
Beyond that, I'm so excited to talk about this new shit that he's building, because new Senate House, that's cool, kind of makes sense.
Carry that over from
the Roman Empire. Yeah, we're going to keep that. The Great Palace. The Great Palace was where the emperor stayed, and this place, man, if I could choose one ancient city, top 5 ancient cities, this would probably be 1 or 2 for a place that I would love to stand in the middle of and smell. Because there's a lot of places back in history that probably smelled just the most disgusting that you ever could.
Oh, yeah.
They had a spice market because they were in the middle of the trading section where you could go down into Africa and you could get spices. Coming through Asia, you could get spices. Every spice was brought into Constantinople and was sold there. It would smell incredible that way. They actually created a perfumery there and had like all of the scents that would use to make, I guess, cologne now, but I don't know what they would call it back then. You think it was perfume back then?
Yeah.
But they would have...
Perfume, I think, is a French word.
Yeah.
I want to say. But whatever they considered it back then, something, a smell changer. I don't know.
Yeah, so that they had an actual, like, building there to do this. They had this open air market where there were stalls just lining the sides. That was where they would shop and do everything.
That carries over to the Grand Bazaar.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get to that point because we're just kind of covering the Byzantine Empire at this point, because that's essentially when Constantinople kind of stops being Constantinople. But the inspiration from like a cultural standpoint, because this place was kind of what they would consider on the frontiers of the Roman Empire, what's closer, to unconquered territory or territory that's conquered by somebody else. Because you're getting this mixture of, like you said, this stuff from Africa, the stuff from the Middle East, the stuff from India, the stuff from China or the Orient and everything coming over and mixing. Not only culturally are you getting all of these different products and stuff like that, but it's just a melting pot for all these different things. Can you imagine like the different like areas for like food? Like you even look at, and I don't know how I didn't know this. I think I texted this to you the other night. Istanbul is the largest city in Europe.
Yep.
I would have gone through the list and been like Paris, London, Berlin, Madrid, and Rome.
Yeah.
And gone through all those. It's Istanbul. It's still, this city has endured, and it as the largest city in Europe. I mean, I can't say anything else other than that, but it's such a cultural hub. The markets that Adam was talking about, the spice markets, the different markets for different ethnicities, that ended up becoming the basis of what's known as the Grand Bazaar. The Grand Bazaar, my favorite media portrayal of the Grand Bazaar is the chase. It's one of the newer Bond movies, but he's actually chasing the guy on the roof of the Grand Bazaar, and they have the motorcycles.
Yes.
And they're running on the top of it.
Does it have red in the title?
No, that one might have been. It actually might be Skyfall. That might be the entry scene into Skyfall. But it's just kind of, because we're not probably going to get into that, but just to give you an idea, the Grand Bazaar was actually something that was first created back in 1455. So it's well in the future, but it's been inspired by how this city's operated. Covers 61 streets and 4,000 shops. It's all indoor. 250,000 to 400,000 visitors daily to this.
It's like a city within a city.
It is. It employs 26,000 people. Jesus. Like if you think Disney fucking World employs a lot of people, working in this Grand Bazaar, 26,000 people. All right, we're going back.
Yeah, so the perfect place to set a palace would be right by the spice market and the perfumery, wouldn't it?
Fuck yes.
So that way you could open the windows to the great palace and all those wonderful smells would blow inside.
It was right at the tip of like what you would consider the peninsula as well. So on one side of you, three sides, you're surrounded by water and the ocean. You still have defensive fortifications, things like that. We'll get into that in just a minute. But then literally between you and the city, to your back and your sides is the sea. You and the city, you just have this shield. So even if the city starts to get a little ripe, you don't know.
Yeah, you're it's got to be just the best place to be. That I can't even really, like, my olfactory senses just kick in trying to smell what it would be like. And I just
think that if you were to have the ability to go back in time, we've thought about it obviously, but the one thing I think people would think of last, visually, they'd be like, it's going to look so crazy. The first thing that would hit you would be the fucking smell, because you've seen what old places look like in movies and things. So you would look at it and be like, well, this looks somewhat familiar.
Yeah.
The smell though, I don't think you would ever smell something like that.
No, and I think it's the best sense. Yeah, best sense. Taste, close second. But the thought of, I don't know why I'm so infatuated with the smell thing, but if you have a window open and you haven't looked outside and it starts to rain, you know that it's raining because you can smell it.
Yeah.
There's just something so, like, your first thought is the sense of smell to catch them, because you don't have to see it to be able to smell it. You can smell shit that you can't see.
Yeah.
And so to walk into a city like that's that buzzing and going crazy, and we'll talk, I think at its peak it hits like 500,000 people that live in the city.
I feel like it's an inspiration. We talked about this, I think, even during the last episode, where ideas are pulled by a certain author, George R.R. Martin. I think this Constantinople is an inspiration. Kind of, there were other cities like it, but kind of for like King's Landing, and Game of Thrones. And then also we're going to talk about something that's pulled straight out of history and into the books. It didn't make it into the show, but we'll talk about one of the defensive things about this city that he borrowed from as well.
If you're looking for something for your eyes too, he created probably the coolest shit that I've ever heard of in ancient times. He created something called the Hippodrome. It was an 80,000 seat chariot racing state. 80,000 people.
I think they said between 80 and 100.
Well, I'm sure it was 80,000 seats, and then standing room was probably another 20,000.
Yeah, up near the outside.
Dude.
So like I said, he's picking and choosing stuff from Rome. Rome had this thing called the Circus Maximus, and the Circus Maximus was the Roman version of what this hippodrome is. The hippodrome is, think of if you've ever seen the movie Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur has that famous chariot racing. That's kind of, I think, the point of the movie. Haven't seen it myself, but I know enough about it. So chariot racing was apparently fucking huge. This was like the sport. So this hippodrome is pretty much both the sporting and the social center of Constantinople. Now, kind of going along with what you said, if you're the emperor and everything, why don't you make the social and sporting center close both to the spice area, but also to where you have a direct connection from the royal palace and you can just walk into your own entrance into the hippodrome.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at pictures of Constantinople, you'll see this area that's preserved as the royal palace or what. I'm not sure what it serves today as a function of today, but you still see the location where the hippodrome is that's right there on that too. So it's got a great view of the ocean. It was for the track, I want to say, it was on a slope when they first went to go build it. Mm-hmm. And so how they actually had to construct it is they had to level out the land, and you'd be like, well, that doesn't seem very hard. The course itself is 1,500 feet long. That's not even to say what it would take to then build all the grandstands that could hold 80,000 people, standing room. You had to have special boxes. So they built basically a series of arched supports under it and basically built up where it wasn't level. And then that became also like a shopping center and a hub. So they turned it into that as well.
I have so much trouble believing that that's how they could think something through back then. This is pyramids. Just listening to you explain that, I had a flashback to us talking about building the pyramids. There's no way that they could have been that smart, but they just fucking were.
I know. I was thinking about this too when I was looking up facts to write down about support structures and how they determine these things based upon like mathematics. And to determine how to build like arches to where there's a keystone, but to also know how many arches you need to support a certain weight to where it stands the test of time enough to where this stuff is still around. The pyramids are incredible just within their scale. But when you really think about it, with the exception of the interior chambers, it's block on block on block, just building it up.
It's a fucking Lincoln log setup.
Yes. When you're having to build, it's the difference between Lincoln logs and like the Technics Legos that move and shit. When you have like Roman architecture and Greek architecture, this is stuff that is actually not just blocks on blocks in a structure that, like a pyramid that you can build up, like a ziggurat. This is designing buildings that are meant to distribute weight in certain ways in which they're able to go ahead and support and stand the most efficient ways possible.
This is those relief chambers that we had talked about above, like the
King's Chamber and everything. Yeah.
That's sort of what they did for one room. These were technically, the archways were like the chambers that they had to build everywhere to support everything. Not just one room had to support everything on top of it. All of the weight was above these things instead of sort of below.
So the track of this thing was almost a third of a mile long, and it was basically just a giant U shape that they would go around, or kind of like an oval, and they would race these chariots around. And so there was a chariot that was tied to 4 horses. And when I was looking up how they structured this, it just reminded me of the Formula One episode. So they had 4 teams, 2 chariots, 8 horses per team. They were sponsored and supported by different political parties. I had no fucking clue. Like, they were state-sponsored political. This is what explains the shit that goes down here so much to me. So you had the Blues, who were the Venetoi. You had the Greens, who were the Prasinoi. The Reds, who were the Russoi. The Whites, who were the Lakoi. And these were the different political factions. I think they called them Dems back then. Demes?
Oi, oi, oi.
So you had these teams that were essentially wearing the colors of these political factions. And then all of the people within the stands were all members of these political factions and everything. So you were rooting not for like a team that you liked. It was like whatever team was, your color and everything. And that's why this also became, like I was saying, like the political hub, like the social gathering, is because this is when all of these people would all be together kind of in the same place.
And we'll talk about how that blows up in their faces.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I forgot to mention about this idea of chariot racing in the Hippodrome, and it feels like this is just another direct rip from Rome. They stopped doing gladiatorial shows.
I think that's why there wasn't a Colosseum.
Well, as they move away from it, you still need something to enjoy as much as you enjoyed those gladiator fights. So if you build the hippodrome big enough and set it up in such a way that the chariot races are going to be what your entertainment is, you can transition out of a very bloody, sacrificial, kind of gross way of thinking. Oh, fuck. That was the other thing we fucking forgot about, too. The whole idea with Constantine changing up cities and him winning the war, he converted to Christianity because he had a dream or a vision or something like that where there was the sign of the cross, and underneath the cross it said, "Through this you will be victorious." And so he changed them over from like the pagan polytheistic religion to just straight Christian monotheism, God is king transition.
It was like, I think one of the largest Christian cities, and at one point was the largest Christian city on the planet.
Just the fact that he was able to usher in Christianity to the Roman Empire in such a way was pretty incredible. So, and that's what goes to get back to what we were talking about. That's where the blood sacrifice kind of started ending, and like the killing for entertainment, because they had to start to find a different level of piety to be able to justify some of the other things that they were going to try to do.
Well, and I don't know if this thought has popped up yet, but when you move and you establish this city, you probably aren't too keen, unless you've been there and been established for a while, but you do want to bring all the people from Rome that you do like what they're doing.
Yeah.
You do want to bring them over because you need businesses, you do need political, what am I trying to say? Political, team, like essentially like teammates or partners. You want all the best artists to come over. You want all the best builders to come over. So because Constantinople is this area in which isn't fully established yet, Constantine is also like, hey, if you guys want to start moving over this direction, you can have a seat at my table. You guys are also going to be able to get the best picks of land within this new city that I'm building. You guys don't have the option to get that in Rome.
Yeah. And I think kind of wanted to, he ruled through Christianity, wanted everybody to be Christian, but there's a section of Constantinople that was built called the Forum of Constantine. It had a second Senate house in it, and then it had something called the High Column of Constantine. Now, this thing sounds cool as hell. I believe it was, I think I heard it in meters. I think it was 45 feet tall. Excuse me. And on top of it, there was a human statue that was supposed to be Constantine with a steel halo, yeah, that was fashioned so as the light would hit it, it would shoot different beams off of it, and it would look celestial. Yeah, however you want to call it. I was thinking terrestrial on that. Underneath it, this is where things get a little interesting, because supposedly underneath it, he buried multiple different things,
like religious relics or artifacts, like from different cultures.
He buried something called the Palladium, which was he had taken from Rome, and it was for who was it?
Palladius?
No, Athena, I believe.
One of
a pagan god.
Okay.
The pagan god Athena. So there's a little nod to the pagans. Supposedly, he also took the 12 baskets from the feeding of the 5,000 that Jesus did, complete with remains of the 7 loaves. Probably couldn't keep fish real well back then, so you couldn't keep any of those. The axe which built Noah's Ark. And also the crosses of the 2 thieves crucified along Christ, and the alabaster vase of perfume.
This is his greatest hits album.
Yeah.
He's basically he's like, I'm getting everyone's religious relics, and they're going under this, so everyone feels like they got a piece. Everyone feels like they got skin in the game here.
All the people that lived in the city before us that were pagan, you guys are cool. I'm going to do some things for you, for your religion, your pagan beliefs, but also at the same time, we're going to throw some of Jesus' stuff in there. We're going to throw some of Noah's stuff in there. And it was all sort of like this burial tribute to where the city was going to go religiously almost.
One thing too that I forgot to mention about the hippodrome that I just thought was fucking cool. So on the like top of the hippodrome, they had these four horses.
Oh yes,
It was basically the four, the four horses that you would have pulling the chariots and everything. But it was this statue that was then also put in copper or bronze. That was cast in copper or bronze.
I think it was bronze.
So it would like shine in the light and everything. So these were called the horses of Saint Mark. Now they end up being stolen during the Fourth Crusade. We're going to get to that, but they then end up putting these four horses on Saint Mark's Basilica in Venice, and I believe they're still there, right?
Yep, didn't return them.
Yeah, it's just a weird thing that like you can go see, and and Saint Mark's Basilica in Venice is like a huge deal. So you go look at those and you see the horses. If anyone has ever been there, and be like, those were originally at the Hippodrome and made for the Hippodrome in Constantinople.
There's so many things in history. We talked about it with the. It must have been the Egypt episode, yeah, because I think it was the bottom half of the goatee on the
All
Sphinx.
the stuff that's in the British Museum.
Yeah.
Yep.
They know where that came from, and we've come so many generations and so many centuries between those two. But for some reason,
it's possession 9/10 of the law type shit.
But you know how it got there.
I know.
But I mean, the fact that stuff like that is still around, because the Hippodrome was completely destroyed, right?
No, it's still there.
I thought there were, because
they did rebuildings. So at certain points, stuff was torn down. Everything. There's certain occurrences that happen here. Essentially, the Byzantine Empire does end, and so you get it being taken over by new management. So stuff does happen in those scenarios, but whatever was really destroyed, any of like the landmarks were rebuilt. There's one thing too. How do you keep a city like this? You have a developing, thriving city. It's also, like I was saying, near the frontiers of your empire.
Yeah.
So you are closer. You don't have as much buffer zone between you and your enemies. You got to defend this thing somehow. So Constantine ends up constructing this thing called the Constantinian Wall. And basically, this wall was kind of pushed out to the outskirts of that area of land that was the only access via land to the city. And at first, because of course the city is not on the enormous scale that it's going to be, the Constantinian walls are placed, closer to the city itself. They end up, doing the job, being able to go ahead and keep out people and obviously keep the city safe because it continues to kind of thrive and develop. But funny thing about this area is it seems to be prone to earthquakes.
Yeah.
And previous Roman architecture, they used a lot of what would be considered the Roman version of concrete. Mm-hmm. And the Roman version of concrete serves that area very well, but it has no flexibility within it. If you remember back in the episode with Great Wall of China, I think, that was an issue that they had, and to provide a material that was able to kind of flex and move without cracking and losing its structural integrity, you get them starting to use when they have to end up rebuilding the walls and everything to protect the city, you get the introduction of using lime mortar, or was it?
I think they used
limestone mortar.
I think they used lime before, because I remember talking about them having lime pits. I think. Oh no, was that one of the South American episodes?
I believe so.
Okay, so lime mortar didn't happen in Rome.
It happened in Asia when they're building the Great Wall and everything. But no, that's why Rome was using more of the concrete-based stuff. So that's why when they built the first wall, it wasn't able to withstand the earthquakes, and any of the future walls that they had were much better able to handle them because they switched over to this method.
Didn't the Chinese decide to just use their rice water? Isn't that how they made theirs?
That's
the sticky rice mortar.
I think it's the sticky rice mortar too. Well, you got to keep the city safe. So even after this one falls down, they're like, okay, you know what? We're just going to fucking build it bigger. The city's also expanding. So if we were to expand anymore, we'd be expanding outside these walls. So they build these things called the Theodosian walls. And that was in, I think, 402.
402 to 405. Or
413.
I had it 405 to 413. Could have been 402.
Yeah. So you get these things built by this guy named Theodosius. Well, they weren't technically built by Theodosius. Funny thing is, you get to name it when it was finished.
Yeah, as the emperor, that's your...
Yeah, you get to decide if, you're going to name it after yourself, regardless of when it gets started. So it was originally started by the guy that kind of preceded Theodosius. So once it's finished during his reign, The Theodosian walls get their name from their moniker. It is 1.2 miles west of the construction of the previous Constantinian wall. So he was like, let's give us some room to expand. We're going to go ahead and bump it way out here. They're still going across a strip of land that's going to be about 3.5 miles.
Yeah, dude, leg room. Probably, I mean, I think you probably want your walls fairly close to your city so you can get resources and manpower to them pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But when your city just completely fills in up to the wall, you get like, well, shit, what do we do now?
This is a new Rome, baby. We need them to stretch out.
1.2 miles, that feels like quite a bit of leg room.
Mm-hmm. So this is the wall that you'll see if you've seen, the walls of Constantine, the walls of Constantinople. The series of fortifications that they built over this is fucking, I love making some numbers. I love some fortifications. So the inner wall, so it's a series of 3 walls, like kind of like just a little bit further apart from each other. So the inner wall, the biggest of them, was, I believe, about 13 to 18 feet thick. That's 4.5 to 6 meters for our metric system.
For everybody else but us.
For everybody else. The walls were about 36 feet high, or 12 meters. Had 96 towers along this 3.5 mile stretch, and each one was like a mini fortress or a mini castle. So 96 of these towers, almost 100 of them.
And the inner wall.
On the inner wall, and they were 45 to 60 feet high, so 15 to 20 meters. And then as far as like width, it was about 30 to 36 feet wide on each side. They were basically these huge barracks and storehouses that could then support and provide armaments and services and everything. You then had, in front of that, almost on a terrace system, coming out in front of that, you would have a gap or a little courtyard, and you would then have the outer wall. This thing was 6 feet thick. You had to be able to get up and walk on it. It was about 24 to 27 feet high. They had towers spaced at the exact intervals in between the larger towers behind it. So it was just this staggered system of these watchtowers, and those ones were about 36 to 42 feet tall. So, like, this is unheard of stuff for this area. You are an army marching in, because this was essentially built at one point to keep out, like, the nomadic tribes of, like, the Eurasian steppe, like the predecessors of Genghis Khan. We're going to get Attila the Hun actually coming in here, and this is one of the reasons that the walls were built, were to keep out the Huns. And imagine, man, you roll up on this and you're like, what the fuck is this? What is going on here?
You haven't even gotten to the most confounding part, because we have the third level out in front.
So the third level is a 60-foot wide moat, who essentially, it was the widest points up to 6 feet, and then up to 30 feet deep. And then right behind the moat, before you got to a little terrace section before that second wall, there was a little mini wall. It looked like, to make it to where if you were even had the balls to try to swim it, you were then meeting a flat stone wall that you couldn't climb up onto.
Also, how was the moat most of the time?
It was empty most of the time.
Yeah. Because they had actually created a system of aqueducts that would be able to fill this moat in, so you wouldn't have water in there all the time. But if you were advancing, or if you were already up too far, they could just go ahead and start letting water into the moat.
Yeah, they didn't have to waste it.
Nope, they could just flood that moat. And just the specs of that to think about, because obviously if you're going after a wall, what's the first thing you need to scale a wall? A ladder.
Mm-hmm.
In order to get the ladders there, you had to either climb them down into the dry moat, walk them across, climb them up the dry moat, run over to the first wall.
Siege engines were useless.
Yes.
What are you going to do, even if it's a dry moat? Yeah, you're taking out the aspect of the water, but then you're also allowing them to maybe build bridges across it to get down there and work. Siege engines are not 60 feet wide. And when people are shooting shit down at you and all that kind of stuff, when you're trying to get across this moat, yeah, it made the city almost practically, for the longest fucking time, pretty much impenetrable.
Yeah.
Fucking, like you said, 17 different sieges against this city, and, well, most of them ended up failing.
Yeah, dude, it just, the whole idea behind the moat has me so intrigued of just, if it's dry, it's dangerous. If it's water, it's fucking impossible.
Ditches, couldn't give two shits about, but you give me a big fucking ditch and you put the name of moat on it.
But the whole idea of water slows you down so much to where those archers on the wall up there have so much time to just pick your ass off trying to get to it. They can probably, I mean, they're up there probably eating a sandwich at the same time that they're firing on you. Like, they'll take a couple bites and look down and be like, hey, that guy's trying to swim across. Somebody get him. And they're probably...
Let's see if he makes it across, actually. I've never seen someone get to the wall and try to climb up there. It's not like he's getting to the inner wall.
Yeah, they just go out there and name their guys. Like, all right, I got that guy in the blue over there. 10 pence if he can get across. Yeah. Somebody's going to kill him beforehand, but they're just having fun.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the aqueduct system, because this is something I think with ancient civilizations that gets overlooked is when you are establishing a city like this, you have to meet your basic needs for survival. That has to be shelter, protection, you have to have water. And yeah, from a security standpoint, having the ocean on three, or salt water on three sides of you, a body of water, is really, really good for protection, but no one can drink that. So if you don't have your city next to a place that can be a source of fresh water, you got to fucking have a way to bring in fresh water that can support an entire city, like you said, that's constantly growing, and at one point got up to 500,000 people during the Byzantine Empire. So this guy named Valens, and I'm sure, and when they were first, Constantine was the one that essentially kind of initiated, of course, this project, but they built a series of aqueducts. There's a really famous one that's like a bridge called the Valens Aqueduct. If you look at a landmark or historical picture of Constantinople or Istanbul now, they didn't tear this thing down. It essentially spans across like two hillsides to keep the aqueduct essentially at a raised level to where the water would run down it. Think of it like a giant built up ditch in the sky, built up on these huge arched brick bridges. And just the roads go through the archways now. In modern day Istanbul, there's traffic lights kind of like next to them and everything. And then there's just one lane of traffic going through this arch. There's another lane of traffic coming the other way through this arch. It's crazy how like the city has kept like all of that old heritage stuff and just built like the modern day city around it. But during the 4th century, the first phase of this aqueduct, just to get water to Constantinople, was 167 miles. That includes, and here's the thing, you're like, well, what do you do to get water? You have to have the water flowing from a point that's at a consistent drop. And when a hill comes in front of you and you have to do something about that, you have to drill through the hill and make a tunnel to get the water to flow. When you come to a valley and then a hill after that where you can't allow the water to drop, you have to build these giant aqueduct bridges to span these canyons to get the water across. And what do you do with the water once you do get it to Constantinople?
Yeah. The whole idea of not having an engine or anything to continue pushing water if it has to go uphill. It just has to continue on that downward trajectory for so far.
You're all gravity, baby.
Yeah.
You got to rely on nothing but gravity there for more than 150 miles. That's the second phase, man, that they ended up doing, because again, as the city is progressing, needs are getting, larger to go and bring in more water and everything. The next section, phase 2, was like 280 miles of aqueducts that they built. So like tunnels going through, essentially like when you're digging into hillsides to create these constantly flowing brick-lined basins that are just flowing this water through. When the Valens Aqueduct, this big bridge that actually goes through the middle of Istanbul now, 3,000 plus feet long. At the top, it's 87 feet high. And then it's 21 to 24 feet thick. And it still just kind of runs through the middle of this section of town. It's fucking crazy to see. Once the water did get in there, it's not like they were only pumping in water to use immediately. They had to build up reserves and everything. So they had to create these systems, because you do get to dry seasons. You get to times when water's not flowing out of these sources in these springs on a consistent high flow basis. So they created a system of both above ground reservoirs that they could store water in. They had the option to then redirect this water to the moats to be able to fill them up for defensive purposes. You then had underground cisterns. So cool. And cisterns are basically, I always thought a cistern was something that actually heated the water and everything, but it's just a giant man-made storage tank.
There's something like a cistern that does that, that's a very similar name. I don't know what it's called, but that's probably why you thought that.
So these, and you're thinking, oh, they just put holes in the ground. No, these things had to be lined to where water wasn't constantly seeping through the soil and they were losing it. The water had to be usable. It couldn't just be a mud water the whole time, because this water was then being put out to fountains within the town and everything that they were using to give to the populace.
They had to have stolen the cistern idea from the Nabateans, right, in Petra?
I don't know, man.
Because the whole idea that they used to go through and line those on the inside so they wouldn't seep in.
It's one of those things where like different cultures have the same needs, and so in some way they find their ways to the same result through different methods. It's just human evolution and human nature. So, but these things compared to the Nabateans, where it was just like a dug basin with like clay lining the sides, these were underground. Basically, what they did is they would take these like an area between two hills, and they would build this huge stone-lined, essentially, box that was supported by these huge pillars. I think in the most famous one, it's the what was the name of it?
Wasn't it up on top of a mountain or something?
It was built between two of the hills.
Oh.
What was the cistern called? The one that was it the Basilica Cistern?
Yes, that sounds right.
The Basilica Cistern. Did you see pictures of it now, modern day? So it was basically all of these, what you would consider Roman Greek style columns, supporting this gigantic room that would then just fill with water and empty with water as they used it, and the aqueducts would just dump the water, or like a branch of it would dump water in here. Nowadays, they have the thing to where on part of it, they have like, it almost looks like epoxy across the floor that's blue lit, and then it's turned into almost like a museum where you walk in, the art, and they're beautiful arches, like intricately made and everything, that they did this in a fucking cistern. Like the engineering is fucking nuts, but they have it all red lit, and they have that water that's lit up, or that acrylic or whatever it is, blue. It's the coolest fucking look. If it was a restaurant, it would be the coolest fucking restaurant ever.
Well, and this just goes to show what we talk about every episode like this.
And the other thing too, sorry, but to kind of stay on that, so now you have this giant cistern, and now you have this level area between these hills.
Yeah.
They would then use that to go ahead and then build neighborhoods and buildings on and everything. So they were experts at not only structural engineering, but also about maximum use of the land and everything.
Well, yeah. And that's, like we talk about every episode, that we have these good times. When everything's going well and you have money flowing in, you have opulence at your fingertips. You can make whatever you want and make it as fancy as you want. I'm sure none of that was really necessary to put the archways and everything like that in, but if you had the time and you had the money, why not go ahead and make it as good as you could? So just the amount of stuff that they had put into the area to make it livable, you have all these resources flowing in. You also have to have a way to get all the leftovers flowing out. So they had actually because when you're in the middle of a siege, you can't like go dump the chamber pot over the wall or anything like that, and you're going to have sewage and a bunch of really gross things building up. We
talked at length about sieges. It's not even the enemy that wins because of the siege. It's something happens within the city that they can't escape. Sickness comes in through the ports, and all of a sudden they're fighting a biological war within the city, and you're getting people taken out by the plague.
So instead of the aqueducts that brought the water in, they had shitqueducts that sent all the sewage and water out, I guess. But
a sewer system.
Yeah, you have to have a system to be able to keep everything in line if you know you're not going to be able to get any resources flowing in or going out. And the fact that they had built all of these things to hold water, to hold food, these grain houses that they had, and then they knew that they couldn't just be ankle deep in sewage. Like, we have to create a full ecosystem to where if we don't have to leave this place for 6 months, 8 months, a year, we can probably make it happen. And, oh, by the way, our population is so fucking big now that we have to continue building these things as the population grows because they've just kicked our belief in how many people we'd have.
All right, man. Before we get any deeper into this, I gotta take a bathroom break.
Okay.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Listen, as we clean up the studio to try and make more room to record, we actually found an excellent company to help us organize our space.
Smart Labels is a very simple to use cataloging system that never leaves you searching through every tote you own just to find a missing item. The setup is really simple, too.
All you gotta do, go to Amazon and order a package of Smart Labels, find and download the Smart Labels app from your app store, create a login, and then you're ready to start scanning the smart labels. You can put them on boxes, totes, anywhere you want to keep organized. Each item can be cataloged by name, description, and you can even actually add a picture to it.
I use them to keep track of my shoe collection, just with the massive amount of boxes that are in this room.
I actually use them to clean my garage. There's nothing worse than going through a tote that you have scratched out and rewritten stuff about 18 times. There's only so much room on those lids where I can literally just take the thing I'm storing in there. I can catalog it. I can take a picture of it. And if I ever need to find it, I know exactly where I'm going.
If you're looking to Marie Kondo your crib, go to Amazon and buy Smart Labels. Smart Labels, the answer to where did I put that?
All right. So kind of getting off the facts about the city and trying to get back into the history, there was an incident that happened with the Theodosian walls where, due to like a series of earthquakes, parts of the wall did come down. Not the whole wall, but like, be it that it's like 3.5 miles long, parts of it are going to get damaged.
Yeah, and you run a span that long, if you have earthquakes 437, 447, and then 448, eventually all that earth is going to start to shake. You're going to get cracks. And a wall that has cracks and is starting to fall to rubble is not really a great wall.
Now, because this city was basically built to withstand these attacks and sieges, especially from that side, all of a sudden these earthquakes happen. If you're a nomadic tribe that's tried to attack Constantinople before and these earthquake hits, you're like, I bet their walls are kind of fucked up at this point. I bet there's some weakness in here. That's when you're going to try to actually attack, when the city's at its weakest and most chaotic. So that actually does happen, and Attila is actually on the fucking way to Constantinople after one of these earthquakes that damages these sections of the wall.
They hear him coming because they have all these other little townships that are more towards Asia that they've taken over. Their Byzantine kingdom, their East Roman kingdom is spread out so far that these cities on the outskirts are starting to hear about Attila and the Huns rolling through and taking territory. So they know they only have so much time for Attila to continue to sack these areas in between before they get to Constantinople.
How do you fucking rebuild sections of wall, though?
Gotta do it fast. I mean, it's a patch job for sure.
What do you do if you're an NFL team sitting in the frigid northwest or northeast? You get a snowstorm blizzard and you got a game tomorrow. Who do you call upon? In true fashion, you call on the fans. And instead of clearing a stadium after a snowstorm, they call upon 16,000 of the blues and the greens. Now, at one point, because there were multiple of these demes, there was also the reds and the whites. The two larger ones kind of absorbed the other two, and now you're kind of left with just the blues and the greens.
The reds and the whites were kind of like the vice teams.
Yeah.
They were relegated.
They get 16,000 of these chariot race fans to basically like serve as a public works and rebuild these sections of wall. Now listen, I know you're shaking your head over there going, no, it didn't happen. That's not to say that some of these guys hadn't previously worked in masonry or construction before. And these also aren't the guys they're just dropping off and being like, who do you like? And he's like, I'm a blues fan. And they're like, you're in charge of figuring out how to reconstruct this wall. They're sending them out there with fucking supervision and being like, you guys are just carrying the bricks and laying them where we're telling you to.
How long did it take these 16,000 people to fix the wall? Not only fix the wall, they actually said at certain points there were reinforcements that they had time to reinforce different parts of the wall.
60 days, baby.
60 days they had time to fix the wall. 16,000 people. This is the shit that I don't believe. I believe that they probably conscripted a lot of people to do it. They were talking about how the blues and the greens would be in their own little work groups, and they would have like cheers and chants to chant on the greens and blues while they're working.
Fans, like European football fans, like in the stadium doing their songs and singing their songs.
No, crazy. Yeah, this is it. I think I actually used the word hooligans on the board somewhere because that's what they were. They were like the first soccer hooligans in Europe.
Chariot hooligans.
But it worked. And they know that this all happened because there was like a plaque in the wall still today that dates and commemorates the day that they had finished it and the day that they had started it and who took part in doing it. So like there's actual proof that this happened in the wall, and if not, it's a pretty crazy troll for thousands of years in the future.
What happens when Attila rolls up and he's like, the fuck?
Yeah, they just turned around. They said that Attila got one look at the walls, like, not worth it. Let's keep on moving. Like they didn't even attempt a siege because these walls and these fortifications look so strong.
Yeah, I definitely don't feel bad for Attila. I'm not an Attila sympathizer here, but that's got to be rough when you've riled up all of your fucking guys and you've been like, we're finally fucking taking it. And you get there and the walls are still there and he's like, who's going to say something?
You don't want to be the next city after you got cock blocked at Constantinople.
Oh, God, no.
Those people are getting the force of 2 sieges. That's a bad deal. So now we're going to transport a little further on into time, the Justinian era. Justinian was an emperor that came from common folk. His father, Justin, who was the emperor before, came into Constantinople, got appointed a member of the royal protectory forces, and then rose to being an emperor through those means.
That's so fucking crazy.
Well, especially after we just talked about like the line of succession for England
That
and
they
for
were
the
putting
kings.
in just people regardless of like if they could have been qualified just because they were related to somebody. You now have something where I don't have an intimate knowledge of the, these emperors or anything like that, but you're getting people in there that are somehow being either elected in by representative or being put into that position because on merit.
Yeah. And as a claimant, I mean, Justinian was Justin's son, so he was able to get in. But his family wasn't of royal lineage beyond his father. He had an uncle that was like a pig farmer.
It wasn't like he was the great, 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 great grandson of Constantine or
Yep.
somehow related to Constantine within his bloodline.
Yeah. So he rolls into town as the new emperor, marries this woman named Theodora. Theodora's awesome. Theodora's family is awesome. The whole situation just seems very, very cool.
Theodora was a stripper with a heart of gold and a brain of gold.
Well, she truly was. Her father was a bear tamer, a bear wrestler, which sounds like the funnest job in the world.
My father, he wrestled bear. He put food on table by wrestling bear.
As bear wrestlers tend to spend their money because they don't really have strong families, I'm sure. Theodora's mother may have been a prostitute. So we have a family who has given the world this wonderful woman who was a dancer in between races at the Hippodrome and caught Justinian's
She was a Laker
eyes.
girl.
Huh?
Well, she was a Laker girl.
Yeah.
Well, she wasn't dancing in the Hippodrome. She was essentially probably dancing Hippodrome adjacent at a bar called the Hippodrome.
Well, they said that she was
The
like
Hippodrome.
she she was like the halftime show. She would go out there and do a dance for all the guys there to like keep them entertained while it happened. So I'm sure it was weird having your empress like thinking maybe it wasn't back then thinking I'm sure they saw everybody naked. Like they had public baths.
Buddy, how did Pam Anderson get found out? She was at a sporting event.
Pam Anderson was never the first lady.
Yeah.
Thank God.
We could have been robbed of something there.
That's true.
But no, so Justinian, maybe it was the situation where he sees her dancing down there. He's like, you see her down there? That one, I'm going to marry that one. And then he uses his power to end up doing that. But she was actually smart as shit.
Yeah. And a very good, like, somebody to stand behind Justinian and to keep him respectable.
So they end up kind of both coming to power. He actually, in like an unprecedented move, makes her empress.
Yep.
Which basically, by giving her and bestowing her the title of empress, they are now equal, emperor and empress. It's a co thing at this point. So in 527, when they get into their position of power, they start revising pretty much all these Roman laws. They're going back. They're looking like, you know what? Probably haven't dusted these off in a while. Let's take a look and see what's still applicable. See if we need to write any new shit.
And I mean, we're going to see this new document that it created. It was like I think it was a grouping of 3 documents called the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. And it actually still is used to influence like public international laws today. But the reason that we pointed out that Theodora's mom was a prostitute and she was a dancer and these things, because part of the laws protected prostitutes from exploitation. It protected women from being forced into the business of prostitution, and severe punishments came across for anybody that was found guilty of rape. So anybody that's taking advantage of
I
women.
don't like the fact that this has to now be established. It takes this
Yeah.
long to establish
True.
severe punishments for this.
Lot of time that's gone on in the Roman Empire where maybe this wasn't the biggest rule. But one of the other things that they did was there was a law in the books that husbands couldn't ever take on massive, like, major debt without his wife basically giving the green light 2 times, consenting 2 times. So there's no like, hey, I just went out and bought this sick ass
Make
chariot.
the stereotypical husband come in and be like, "Hey, I wish Rodney Dangerfield. Hey, I wish we had the reverse of this in the day. Now women are putting men in debt all the time."
I was just trying to go out and buy a new car, Toots. You went over and spent $1,000 on shoes. But pretty cool that you give a woman that much power in a relationship to where if your husband is going to basically sink your family, the wife has to be like, yeah, no, that's cool. And then, are you sure? Yeah, no, I'm in too. Like, there was a lot of strength in the female...
A lot of female empowerment.
Yes, yeah. And I'm sure that that was probably because his wife was such a strong woman that she helped kind of facilitate some of that happening. He also built hospitals and provided free medical care to a lot of the poor residents that lived in Constantinople. Another thing that he did that was very cool was he made all public baths free.
I see this is one of those fucking anti universal healthcare ads. And it's like, they tried it in Constantinople. What happened to them? They're not there anymore. Don't let this happen to America.
Well, that's what a lot of this stuff was, because you're providing free baths for anybody, which means that everybody, there's a level of cleanliness that everybody is afforded.
Fighting disease?
Yeah, probably pretty big. Not super big, because we'll talk about something real bad that happens later, but it wasn't because of the water.
Not their fault.
Yeah, not their fault. Not their fault.
20 state bakeries.
Yeah.
Bread, which was a mainstay and a staple of their diets, was a government city provided service. Like there were 50 state bakeries and they had different sections, and so you would be essentially providing free bread to everyone.
Free bread, free wine. They said that they actually kept a ledger, and they would like check the rights for people to show up and prove who they were, and they were on a list. They said that the list was set at 80,000 participants, and they never had to raise it. So all in all, that seems like kind of a non-fact, but it does kind of go to show that 80,000 was what they had set up, but they never had to push it further because there wasn't that much homelessness. There still was, but there weren't ever like an influx of poor to where they had to raise that 80,000 to say like 100,000. They put a cap on it correctly to service the needs of the people.
Well, Justinian did also not make some great decisions as well.
Yeah.
So, as
real bad at war. Turns out he was not good at war.
Good in the city with certain things, bad at stuff outside the city. So in 532, there was a little bit of a grumbling in the amongst the public, basically due to some rising debt, which then gets transferred over to the public in form of taxes, things like that. And you get this thing that pops off calling the Nika riots. And this is basically popped off I don't know if it was like at a chariot race or something like that. I think there was a fighting, there was a riot between two of the blues and the greens.
Yep.
Basically. So think of it as like literally the largest soccer hooligan fight. And at the end of this, Justinian basically refuses, or not at the end of it, sorry, what kind of popped it off is Justinian refuses to release these 2 chariot hooligans who were sentenced to death.
So, and they were actually, their execution was carried out. They had 4 of them originally. All 4 of them went up to be hung. And as the ropes were as they were dropped, part of the stage broke that this was happening on. Mm-hmm. So it hung 2 of them, and then the other 2 weren't hung. So the next time they show up at the chariot races, Justinian still has these 2 guys locked up because he has to carry out the death sentence.
I thought they were just going to be like, the gods have shown us a sign. They killed these 2 and they should have let these other 2 go. Well, or it wouldn't be the gods have given us a sign. God has given us a sign at this point.
Well, and that's what it was, because these rival factions joined together to start yelling at Justinian to let them go because he's sitting across the hippodrome from them.
Yeah, he has like a royal box. It's like you see in like movies, like there's a emperor's box that they sit in.
So they're chanting and screaming that God's will saved these two men from a fate that wasn't theirs because they were actually innocent in it. But Justinian's like, I'm not letting these guys go. I was supposed to kill them, and we had a malfunction. The stage breaking wasn't God. That was just shoddy craftsmanship. I'm going to go out and commit all these wars and go into the Crusades because God told me to kill these Muslims, but God didn't break the stage in order for me not to kill these guys.
I know what he wants.
We're picking and choosing some very odd things. And immediately, everything just descends into chaos. The hooligans just go nuts. And this is where the Nika riots kick off. They spread throughout the town. They're just burning, looting, pillaging any of these very famous, rich areas of town.
As soon as a riot gets kicked off like this, I don't think it really has. It just has a direction that it's heading.
Yeah.
I really think at this point, most of these people, regardless of like, there was probably, a good portion of them that were like really politically charged behind this, but it's the mentality of the mob. Once this shit gets started, it's just like, I see that guy breaking a window, I'm gonna fucking break a window now.
Yeah, the Hagia Sophia, the biggest meeting house church kind of thing that they had in the town, got burned. So they didn't really give a shit. They had actually found another guy who they wanted to put in place of Justinian, and he was unofficially given the crown. Justinian was about to leave town. He's like, I gotta get the fuck out of here. These guys are gonna kill me, and it's not gonna be pretty. Let's pack our shit and get out of here. His wife was like, no. Those two swinging clackers between your legs are big enough to be able to stay here and be able to figure this out.
Motherfucker, where are we supposed to go?
Yeah. What? You think we're gonna
All
go over
my
to West?
shit's here.
Yeah, we're gonna go over to Western Roman Empire. They're not gonna be cool with us. You remember how that guy Constantine that built this city beat them? Probably not gonna be real friendly. So they stick around, and one of the major issues was they were off at war, so there wasn't a standing army to be able to help them. The other issue was the guys that were rioting were members of the political parties. And so you have people that are in the standing army that are also very political that are going to side with their people. So he ends up going around and finds enough guys to build up an army. What were the Vikings?
Oh, keep going. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, the Varangians?
Sure.
Varangian. The Varangian Guard.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have fucking Vikings as your personal guard.
Yeah,
like the dudes wearing the furs with the battle axes and everything who have no skin in the game except you are protecting them and providing them everything that they want. And so those are your royal guards. That's fucking crazy. And that's factual.
Yep. Yeah, they came down to trade, and they found that it was such a great, incredible, immaculate town that they decided to, instead of trade and go back, they decided to.
And you're wondering, how do a bunch of Scandinavians and guys like that get down to the Mediterranean? They literally, because they were so good at, portaging their boats and traveling across land and then putting them in doing rivers, they got down to the Black Sea and then down the Bosphorus Straits or coming down to that river that fed the Golden Horn. And so, yeah, you're sitting on the throne in your palace and you're just flanked by these fucking guys sitting on the steps flanking you down the throne with like a battle axe sharpening it, fucking horned helmet, long ass fucking beards and hair, blonde.
Well, you see their ships rolling into town. You're like, pull the chain, stop these guys, and then they show up and they're just your guards after that. Like they're your boys. So
how are you doing?
They get this
we
force
are
set
here
up.
to join the royal guard.
Can we call it the Varangians? Yeah, sure, we're in. They get this fighting force and they start quelling the rebellion and pushing it back. They end up trapping 30,000 people inside the hippodrome and just go ahead and kill an entire 30,000 people inside of this big arena.
It then turns into the Colosseum.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
On a scale that the Colosseum never imagined.
Killing 30,000 people inside of one room.
During just a few series of days.
Yeah, that's a pretty quick deal. So yeah, that ended the Nika riots. That kind of reinstalled Justinian's power.
How do you make it up to the people? What would you do to make it up to the people?
You got to make a big grand gesture, and you just had the Hagia Sophia burned down, so you're going to go ahead and restore the Hagia Sophia. The fire that happened gave Justinian all the opportunity to rebuild it and to make it better. The last restoration was in 415. We're in, I believe, 532 now, so it's been a while since there was a restoration from a fire or from an issue. And these issues, the reasons they needed restorations before, not to say that Constantinople was always this very peaceful, loving place. There was a lot of inter-rebellions going on inside the city. The Hagia Sophia...
When you have that much of a melting pot
Yeah.
of different cultures and everything like that, the city was a Christian city because essentially the city was recognized as a Christian city, which meant that the emperor of the city was Christian. That didn't mean that everyone that lived within that city was just like, yay, Christ. No, what it actually meant is just the ruling body of that city and the people in power were pretty much recognized by the church.
Yeah. Pagan people were still there. Jews were still there. Everybody was represented at a certain level, but the overarching thing was always going to be Christianity. So this Hagia Sophia place, I mean, you got to talk about it because it's incredible.
So was it Hagia?
They said the pronunciation in Greek would be Aya for that word.
Oh, Hagia. Okay. Hagia. So Hagia Sophia. So it ends up being completed by Justinian, and for 1,000 years from its completion, it is the largest. There's a debate between cathedral and building, which I guess that would probably be the same thing because the largest projects were always seem to be religious based. For 1,000 years, it was finally, I guess, passed by St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Was it? Is that what took over the title? So the thing that was kind of crazy about this is you start to do things that have never been done before. Like, not only, like I was saying, how do you make it up to the people with this grand gesture, but how do you set the greatest city even further apart from any other cities they're going to follow? How do you make sure that, God looks upon your city and sees the wonders that you've created? So the main component of this building, if you guys want to look it up, so I don't have to kind of explain in depth what it looks like, but the main feature of this building is this giant domed roof that takes a portion, or the center portion. Now, this thing is just a little over 100 feet in diameter, so from one point across to the other, not in circumference. At this time, to make a domed roof with the building structures that you had, you don't have steel.
Yeah.
You don't have any way to go ahead and forge beams or anything like that. So you're building this thing out of stone and having to support it just simply off of, and we just talked about this, how do you figure out the fucking math on this? Like, there are just people, the numbers just make sense to them, regardless if all they're working with is a piece of paper, a fucking pencil, and a T-square, and the weight on a string to make sure that things are fucking level. You create 100-foot diameter dome raised up. I think they said the maximum was about 100. It was 125 feet above the ground. Might have been like the apex. It's, when you see pictures of it, it's enormous. Like, I'm not doing the scope of it justice, but they figured out a way that the best base for this would be a square base. And you're like, well, a square base for a fucking circular dome, how do you fucking do that? So using their fucking Roman math, they figure out that they can build supports in each corner of this square. These supports would then go up and fan out into, basically, the only way I can describe it is like triangles that would then meet and curve and match the circle. So it was supported the entire way around the dome. And then they figured out also, when you go a little bit lower on the dome, if you're looking at it from the outside, you see these half domes that are built into this. They were then, this will even distribute the weight even greater and make it to where it can support and keep this dome at an angle and tight enough to where it's all the weight is resting upon itself and not caving in. Like, how the fuck do you figure that out when you don't have any type of like calculator, computer program that can crunch numbers or data? You're doing this just off of the fact that you know what structures distribute weight and what you need at what angles to float fucking stone. And then trusting that you're going to have all your holy people under it.
Yeah.
A large portion of the time, so you really can't
all
kill
of
them.
the important people are going to be here. This is just the perfect example of a thought that I have often. Just a little brain game that I like to play. I like to kind of think about how far back in history I would have to go in order to be the smartest person on the planet. And every time we do one of these episodes and I hear something like this, it just pushes me back so much further. Like I'm basically back to like where the cavemen invented fire almost.
What do they call that? That period of time?
The like Neolithic period.
Neolithic, yep.
Yeah.
We just keep going even further back in the Neolithic period.
I
You might be the cleverest in a more modern time than that and everything, but in a field, you're not going to be the smartest in a certain field.
No. Well, in order to do anything like this, I couldn't even come close today.
And we mentioned that too when I was talking to you. Like, not only is the engineer that designs this and you build and everything, if this shit fucking collapses and you embarrass the emperor, it's an off with your head type situation. Like, your life is literally on the line to figure this thing out. So they basically build this just amazing. It's still existing today. You can take a look at pictures of it, and just to believe that this thing is as old as it is and it's still standing is fucking nuts.
It's actually the whole thing. I don't know why I find it so humorous, but and we'll get to Mehmed and the Muslims coming in and taking over and the Ottoman Empire showing up. After Constantinople is taken over by the Ottoman Empire, they go in the Hagia Sophia and they put down carpets over all of this beautiful marble for prayer. All of the paintings and everything on the wall are just not necessarily painted
all the murals,
over.
like the painted murals and everything.
They're all
frescoes.
I think that's what they were. Like they're just covered. And once the Ottoman Empire left and they were going through and doing the restorations, they went through and pulled up all this marble that hadn't seen the light of day in thousands of years.
It's like, why did someone? These are nice pine floors. Why would someone put linoleum on these?
They're pulling all of the plaster off of the wall, covering these ancient, just beautiful paintings.
Can you imagine being one of the first guys to go in there to start pulling plaster off, and they're not prepared for this, and he goes to chunk it off, and it takes a piece of like this beautiful fresco with it, and the person just looks at it, and he's like, oh my God, there's stuff behind here. And then the rest of it just gets restored beautifully and it looks great. And then there's just this fucking chunk.
6-inch chunk.
And he's like, yeah, that's where fucking Frank hit it with the sledge.
Yeah. We told him to go in easy and then he picked up the sledgehammer and now we have a hole in this beautiful painting. But again, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. These sieges start hitting. There had been 3 earthquakes that had happened, damage to the domes. There was partial collapses that had happened that they've gone through and kind of cleaned up and fixed, but the massive dome never fell. The fact that it went through all these earthquakes after it happened and just never fell is so incredible that main dome was that strong and that well built. Getting back to these sieges, because that's sort of the story. I feel like Constantinople was around for a very long time, but 17 sieges to survive is a just incredible number.
You're the crown jewel of the Roman Empire. Like, you are the wealthiest and largest city in the world. Like, you are just, everyone is looking at that city and being like, if I get that city, I'm now the emperor.
Yeah,
I'm now the King Dick. I have to have this. I have to add this to my collection.
Yeah. So 626, the Theodosian walls repelled the first of these 17. It was the failure on the Sassanid Persians that actually allowed Constantinople to help in the Roman-Persian wars. So the fact that they couldn't sack the jewel of the Roman Empire, they just gave up.
Yeah.
Like the fact that
we pot committed to this, it was either going to work out or it wasn't.
There's no way we're going to be able to take down the crown jewel, so we're not going to be able to have the kingdom.
Well, 674, there's a little bit of a relative what you would consider possible peacetime in there. Then in 674 to 678, you get the first of the Arab sieges. And this is basically what is part of the Arab Byzantine Wars, or Byzantine War.
And they had the ace in the hole, because this was around the time that we started seeing something that I think we've talked about in an episode before. Yeah, shit gets me excited. Greek fire. We decided pre-episode
that kept state secret.
Yeah. We decided before this episode that if we ever end up getting linked up with a pot distributor to create our own strains at one point, this is just a pie in the sky idea. First strain's got to be called Greek Fire.
Oh, yeah.
And the testing is going to be very arduous to get figured out which strain we want. But Greek Fire sounds like the coolest name for almost anything. But weed and what they used it for as a weapon is the best name.
Oh, yeah. So this was they're not sure what it was comprised of, but they have ideas based upon what materials were available at the time. Greek Fire was different in the sense that there were things that were like accelerants that they would use for like sieges to burn down doors and everything like that. The crazy thing about Greek Fire was Greek Fire would also burn on water, and it would burn when it was wet. So combining that with the Navy of being able to essentially shoot fire at the other ships and not have them have that available water and try to like put it out, it was a fucking game changer. And what they also did, well, you're like, well, you still have to like throw buckets of it. How do you get it onto their ship, and how do you not spill it? So the Byzantines are credited with the invention of the flamethrower. Yeah. And what they would do is they would heat up the Greek Fire to make it more liquidy and everything, because they think that part of it was almost like had some like sap or stuff in it, and so it was a little bit thicker material.
It also, for it to work on water, I think it would have to have some sort of petroleum in it.
Yeah. And so they would heat it up to get it very liquidy, and then they would pressurize it and be able to... I see it more so as a more complex system of those pool squirters that you just put it in, you pull back the stick, and then you shoot it. It was kind of a thing like that. But what they would do is they would mount these on their front of their ships. And not only that, they would take busts of animals or sculptures of animals like fucking like tigers and fucking lions and shit like that. They would then gild them on the front of the ships, and they would run the fucking Greek Fire tubes where it shot out of these animals' mouths, so it looked like these ships were fucking breathing fire in battle. And so once these enemy ships got hit with this fucking Greek Fire, they fucking couldn't put it out, and these things are completely made of wood. They also did the invention of what they considered the hand grenade, because they found out with this Greek Fire shit that they were like, well, are these fucking flamethrowers the only way we can use Greek Fire? And they're like, what if we just put it into like pots and then throw it, and then it'll break open, and then we can like set it on fire with arrows and shit. So they started doing this also with fucking trebuchets and catapults, is where they would take these big clay pots, fill it with Greek Fire, and then they would, light the top of it, like some type of like a rag or something, launch it, and then it would break open and completely scatter this fire fucking everywhere.
Yeah, it's a Molotov cocktail. This is the later building upon Hannibal throwing the pots of poisonous snakes onto boats. This is like the next evolution of it. They said there were points on the walls that they created kind of like chutes to where they could launch this Greek Fire out of the walls down onto people that were not coming
tar.
Yeah,
tar onto these guys.
One of the other things, and I'm going to tie it in just the shittiest way possible. To have a great navy, you have to have great sails. To have great sails, they had silk. And the way that they got silk was they had sent missionaries over into China, and China figured out how to make silkworms into, I guess, domesticate them and then
turn it into an industry.
Yeah, to make silk. They had sent over these missionaries with the idea that they would be over there and learn how to take care of them. And then they had pieces of bamboo that they would use to take the silk worms. They said the worms are pretty fragile, so they would think they took like eggs or larvae or something like that, load them up into the bamboo, then bring them back over to Constantinople, basically cut out being the middleman for this silk trade. And they created their own silk trade out of Constantinople that they would then sell.
By Constantinople.
Yeah.
Locally made.
And they said the Varangian Guard, the Vikings, really liked it, but they had actually set up a system where the Vikings wouldn't get the good silk. They would get like the worst silk grade that they had. But the fact that they were Vikings, they didn't know any better. So they saw this silk. They're like, oh my God, this is great for sales. Let's keep this.
Yeah.
But they had actually moved the silk trade out of China and into Europe by smuggling back these silkworms. It's just...
Like, how much did that contribute to that becoming a thing, maybe in Paris and France and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, dude. That was, if you weren't getting silk out of Asia at extremely high prices and you were getting it out of Constantinople at still high prices but better prices, you're going to buy the stuff out of
That
there.
sweet, sweet Byzantine silk.
And you got to think, once the Chinese figured out that their stuff wasn't selling, like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Oh, they stole them. The Christian work they were doing in China just went ahead.
This was a fucking Jurassic Park caper. They had to fucking steal the silkworms and escape with them.
But it was really important for Greek fire to come about because the wars that they were fighting overseas to try to grow their empire or keep their empire, these sieges are getting to the gates of Constantinople because these other vassal cities outside are losing. So you're spending so much money to be able to go out and fight these guys that you don't have a lot of money left in the coffers. And that's going to come up for this first raid that we'll get to in a second.
The other thing, too, is if you're looking at where Constantinople is, if someone's going to march overland against an army or with an army against you, it's going to be coming from, like, the north.
Yes.
And then coming down. So they're going to be able to come from that whole area. If you're out in the Mediterranean still in that area, fighting battles and things like that, like over in Africa, things like in that area, you're in the opposite direction of where those armies are. And so everything that is outside your territory to the north, you're not expanding that buffer zone any by conquering that area. You're still fighting the wars that were technically, you're just trying to kind of keep your empire together at that point because you're still trying to fight in those areas that you once controlled or trying to retake.
Yeah. So you're stretched thin. Your money is getting low because you're fighting all these wars. You're starting to see these other groups come in and lay these sieges on your towns because they're actually getting to you. You need a lot of friends at this time. In 1054, there's something that was called the Great Schism. And the Great Schism, just to put it plainly, was the pissing match between the Greek Orthodox and the Christian or the Catholic Church. So what had happened was it had started as the West wanted the East help to protect themselves because the Normans that we learned about from Normandy had just come down and taken southern Italy. So the West
Northern Italy.
No, they made it all the way down to South Italy.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, so the western part of the Roman Empire was just the eastern part of Italy.
Oh, shit,
like, it was, they were pretty scared. And that's why they came down to try to get help from the Greek Orthodox Eastern Romans, the guys who they lost a war to, but they needed their help again. So as they were going through and trying to figure out a path to move forward with friendship, they started seeing that the rituals that were going on in the church, they didn't really agree with. And when I say rituals, I'm talking about stuff like, I believe it was the Catholic Church used leavened bread for the sacrament, or unleavened bread for the sacrament, and the Orthodoxy wanted to use leavened bread for the sacrament.
Real fucking
hard-hitting stuff, yeah. There were some other things as far as, like, the Romans still like death and sacrifices that way, whereas this Orthodoxy had kind of moved away from that. But it ended up happening that the Pope, who was kind of the head of the Western Empire at that point,
centered in Rome.
Yeah. Goes ahead and excommunicates the innumical patriarch, or ecumenical, that's a bad word, patriarch, that was the highest ranking member of the church in Constantinople. His name was Michael I. He excommunicated Michael for going against their religion, and then Michael goes around and excommunicates the Pope from the church.
George Costanza situation.
Yeah.
You can't excommunicate me. I'm excommunicating you.
And this breaks into this big schism, and it basically is what still today separates the Catholic Church from Orthodox.
There's a larger schism for different beliefs now, but started out with that leavened bread.
Yeah, dude, just the absolute craziest way for these guys to just be like, oh, we want to be friends, but how do you guys cook your bread? You use a leavening agent?
It's not going to work.
We
for us.
probably don't want to be a part of it.
One thing, I don't know how I missed this, but talking about the sieges that had taken place previously against the Arab state, so there were two separate ones. There was the one initially in 764. They took a break, and then they came back and did another one. The second one, they came back and they were like, well, we couldn't attack them by land and completely beat them, so we're going to go land and sea this time. So if you can essentially surround the city, and it had defensible walls, like sea walls, all the way around as well. But if
just
you
one, not the three that were the Theodosian walls, it was just one wall encircled.
But if you could get around essentially into the harbor and attack that soft area that wasn't as heavily defended, you could actually take the city. Well, to protect the Golden Horn, this is so fucking cool. They basically, there was a tower on one side, on the side that was actually Constantinople, and then across the entryway, there was this tower, and it was called the this one was called the Megalos Pyragos, the Great Tower.
And it was in Galata.
Yeah, and the one that was on the other side, that was actually in Constantinople, was the Tower of Eugenius. Now, in between these two towers, they had the ability to run this big fucking chain across the entirety. And this thing was, the chain itself was made of like hundreds of these iron forged links. They were between 26 and 33 pounds each link, and they were about 20 inches long.
You said it was like the size of a forearm?
Yeah, if you were to take your forearm and go from like elbow probably to like fingertip, if you have a normal size one, I'd say that's about how big the link was.
Yeah. But I would have to say thousands, because I feel like, because the city where the anchoring, the one on opposite the Golden Horn, I believe was the city that Byzas thought was the blind people.
No. It wasn't across the entirety of the, what's that called? The
Strait?
Bosphorus. It wasn't the Bosphorus Strait. When you come into the Bosphorus Strait, the Golden Horn is if you went around the little outlet that Constantinople is on, the outlet is to the left. It wraps around that, and so they just put it across that. It was still, 0.46 miles long. 750 meters.
So almost a half mile long.
Yes.
That's pretty fucking far.
Well, and when you're thinking about it, if any of you have ever read the Game of Thrones books, King's Landing, the harbor, Blackwater Bay. During the siege of Blackwater Bay, Tyrion comes up with an idea to put a chain across it, and once the boats are in, they raise the chain and the boats can't escape this. And they also use this stuff called, is it called wildfire? But it basically is this green shit that is basically the knockoff of Greek fire because it burns on the water. So fucking George R. R. Martin taking two things from fucking Constantinople to write those books. Well, you can't stretch a chain just because of the sag and the weight and everything. You couldn't get a chain that taut, especially regardless of how much strength you had.
And in water where you lose,
it's going to sag. And so that way it's not going to close off the whole harbor. You're like, well, they could just go to the high points or they could just sail in the middle when the chain is low. What they did is they had these 8 pontoon pylons. So these things weren't just constantly out there. When they had it open, what they would do is they would have it all kind of tucked off to one side. And then if they knew that an army was coming, it wasn't like they just got surprised by 100 ships. Yeah. They would then have their navy bring the chain across. And in between this, expanse of 4.6 miles, they had these 8 pontoon pylons that were made of this huge section of like logs that were all put together by like iron bands and iron plates that served as pontoons. These things were 65 by 49 feet. And they had 8 of them going across the harbor because that's what they determined was the appropriate amount of chain sag to where it would still keep it low enough to where ships couldn't get through. So during this second siege of these the Arab state, the Navy comes in to attack, and they just fucking raise this chain, and these boats are just fucking piling up against it, and now you're worrying about getting launched Greek fire from both sides of you. And on the other side of the chain is the fucking Navy from Constantinople, literally just launching Greek fire against you there too.
This is worst case scenario. There's nothing that can prepare you for running into a big ass chain and then getting pots of fire that spreads in water.
You're sailing toward that and you're like, what the fuck is that in the water? And like, go around the pylon, just go around those things. And they're like, there's something between them. They're like, what do you mean there's fucking something between them? And your ship just fucking, you feel it hit, start making sounds, slow down, you're stopping like, what the fuck is that? Like, it's a fucking chain.
Yeah.
Okay, well, try to turn us around if we can and then sail down to another port. It's across the whole fucking thing.
It's a marvel, and the thought process that would go into it.
Engineering marvels.
Well, yeah. We talked about the domes in the Sophia and how much like thought had to go into building them, but literally just a chain across the water is the most basic thought that you could have.
But how do you engineer it to work? It's the most
exactly.
basic thought. Like, how did we used to block stuff off? Like, well, you know, when we're taking tickets from people in line to go see the theater, we put them behind ropes. Like, so we can just stretch something across here? Yeah. Okay, well, what's strong enough to... Can we make rope that big? No. We need to make it a chain. Okay. Well, then how do we make it to where the chain just doesn't sink underwater and everything? They're like, I don't know, man.
Wood?
Yeah. What floats?
A lot of wood?
It's just fucking nuts. But like all good things, man, it does have to come to an end at a certain point. Weirdly enough, its downfall kind of starts, but it gets bit by it bites the hand that feeds it. So during the Fourth Crusades, on their way down to, and this was again a big geography lesson for me in what took place to get down to the Crusades, like what methods you could go. So if you were going by boat, like from England or whatever, and you're going to fight in the Crusades, you could take a ship, go all the way down the coast of Spain, Portugal, go into the Straits of Gibraltar, all the way through the Mediterranean, and then you would end up having to get to what the Holy Land would be, and that would be like where Jerusalem was, and also where like the Christians had their fortifications and their port cities.
Well, where they had them, and then they lost them, and then they took them back, and then they lost them, and then they took them back, and they wanted to go down and kill some more Muslims, so then they stayed and killed more Muslims. The whole idea behind the Crusades, there's so many Crusades, and it's going to take fucking forever.
But you could also go on land, and if you went on land, the quickest way to cross and not have to go around the Black Sea was you could march yourself down to fucking Constantinople, and then you could just cross that section over and be essentially on the side where like Jerusalem and everything was. So during the Fourth Crusade, this group of Christians decide, you know what? I know that is our largest Christian city that we have, but fuck, do you guys really want to head all the way down and try to like fight like in Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff, or should we just sack the shit out of this city?
Did you hear this story?
Somewhat, yeah.
So the Fourth Crusade left with very, very little money. And it takes a whole hell of a lot of money to get those boats that you were talking about to take you over there. Mm-hmm. So they started marching, and they marched into Venice. When they were down in Venice, there was this guy named Alexios Angelos.
Yes, I did hear this about them getting paid.
Yeah, so he was somebody who had been exiled from Constantinople. He said that he had a claimant to the throne and that he should be the emperor. I don't know what his claim was, but it was enough to get all these crusaders to be like, okay, well, why are you telling us this? He's like, well, you guys need money to get down to the Crusades to go ahead and fight down there, right? Well, if you help me go through and sack Constantinople, then once I'm king, they have a ton of money in their coffers. So if you can make me king,
once my guy is king.
No, it was him.
Oh, okay.
He said that he had the heir, or that he had the right to the throne.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So I thought you meant like he had the heir, like I got this guy.
No, he had a claim to the throne. So he's like, once we get down there, if you guys sack the city and I become king, I'll give you all the money you want to go down to the Crusades. And they're like, well, it's another Christian city though. We can't go do that. We want to kill Muslims.
Those are the ones we actually like try to protect, I thought.
Yeah. But he's like, you guys need money though, right? And they're like, well, yeah, and we want to get down there and start killing those other guys.
Money talks, God walks.
So if you need some help, go ahead. We'll figure it out. So this group, this crusade unit, ends up showing up not led by, but brought there by this guy named Alexios Angelos.
Has the guys in Venice front the money for building all of the ships to actually get them there. So at this point, they're like, when we get there, hey, we'll pay you when we get there.
So 22,000 Crusaders go ahead and roll up. They can't get by the Golden Horn chain. So they go over to Galata, the city that was on the other side where the
anchor point.
The anchor point for the chain was. They go ahead and overthrow that city. They end up getting the chain dropped. Once the chain, gets dropped, they go ahead and enter into the port once they get through the port, they didn't have the issue of the Theodosian walls. They just had the issue of the walls that were closest to the water, which was a single wall.
Well, the other thing too is if you're thinking about it, Constantinople had never had this chain fail. They never had their defenses breached like this. So if you could get past this big, strong defense, it wasn't like defense in layers.
Yeah.
Essentially, once you got past this, the port was made for getting boats unloaded as quickly as possible. You didn't have a ton of fortifications to have to get through, like customs and all that kind of shit. It was just like, this needs to be an area of flow where the supplies are flowing in and shit's flowing out and ships are coming and going. So when you got troops in here, this place wasn't built for defense. So you could really just, it was the soft underbelly of the city.
That's exactly what I was just thinking, yeah. And the fact that they've been out trying to keep their kingdom in order, they didn't have a lot of money to keep repairing these walls. So this wall that they had to go through was pretty weak to be able to get in.
You also don't expect to be like, you expect like to see the Crusaders coming up and being like, oh, hey, you guys are Christians too, right? Are you just passing through, getting to the Crusades? All of a sudden they start fucking like attacking you. You're like, the fuck?
Yeah, you're supposed to be on our side. Why do you guys all have crosses on your chest and you're coming after us?
Yeah.
Same team here. So they end up making it into the city. Over 3 days, they just sacked and ransacked the city. Alexios is crowned emperor, and when they walk into the Constantinopolitan Bank, what is that? What would they call themselves? Constantinopolites?
I don't know. Constantines? I have no idea.
Probably Constantines. That probably sounds right. But when they get into the bank, they realize...
Constantinopolis?
Yeah, I like that one. They were right next to Asia, too, so that kind of makes sense. They open up the bank, or the vault doors. There's no fucking money. Because of all the money they had to spend fighting the wars over there. This guy had been exiled for so long.
Cash poor, baby.
Yeah.
It's like all those people that own all those estates and castles and shit in like England and everything, that there's nothing inside them. It's just the land and
So these guys did not have the money to be able to go ahead and make it to where they needed to be.
Not only that, they didn't have the money to fucking pay back these people that they had paid in Venice or in front of the money in Venice to build these ships and everything. It was like half of what they owed them.
Yeah, Alexios goes ahead and he's like, well, I don't have the money, but if you want to go through and raid the city, and we usually frame like some of our paintings in gold.
Try to even us up.
Yeah.
Try to even yourself up on the way out.
This was like them being like, go rip some copper pipe out of the wall and take it to the recycler, and then however much you get for it, you get to keep it. So the town just falls into disarray. They can't do anything about it. So this happens in 1204. 1261 is actually the next time that the Byzantine Empire takes back Constantinople.
I don't believe the emperor that was currently the emperor before this new guy was put on the throne. I think he got out, right?
He didn't. He was just this new guard had came in and placed their emperor in, but Nicaea was the empire that was used to take back Constantinople. Once they took it back, obviously the guys that just sacked it and took it over weren't trying to repair everything. Everything was in just a really poor state. The way that they got in was they gained access through a secret passage that the Crusaders didn't know about because nobody in the city was going to tell them where the secret passageway was. So they got back in there and then surprise attack to take down these forces that had been there ruling. And I'm sure the other people that probably weren't too pumped that these other Christians showed up.
You still had a giant populace that hadn't left the city. There was a change in management, but your populace, a lot of them anyway, are still there.
Yeah. And after that, the fact that they didn't have a lot of land, they just lost their crown jewel. There wasn't going to be a lot of money coming in and everything. Their defenses were just so weakened at this point, but still they were there. The Ottoman Empire just exploded. They were dominant in most of the wars that they fought. They expanded the reach all the way into Europe. And like I say, Constantinople was down, but they weren't out. There were 4 unsuccessful sieges of Constantinople in 1391, 1394, took a little break, 1411, another break, 1422. But
four times these guys were trying to take, they wanted it so bad. So the Ottoman Empire, just geographically, if you're looking where Constantinople is if you're looking at a map, left side of the Bosphorus Straits, right side is basically the Ottoman Empire at that point. They extend all the way down kind of in a strip, all the way down the coast taking like all of the Holy Land, basically Jerusalem, Mecca, that entire area. They then expand a little bit west into like Asia Minor, and so they're looking to go ahead and expand on the other side of the Black Sea. And Constantinople is just sitting there looking ripe for the taking. But yeah, you go ahead and you take your first one, then you take your second attempt, then you take your third attempt. You're waiting 10 years, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 years between these things. You take your fourth attempt, and then finally you try a fifth time, and you take 30 years to get through this, because you've learned your lesson. Hey, this isn't a 10-year thing. We can't keep doing this shit every 10 years. What do you say we wait 30 and then we give another crack at this?
Got to figure it out somehow. We got to make sure that this all happens right. The fall of Constantinople happens in 1453. It was led by he was Sultan prior to, there was a time off, and then he was given the Sultanship again, Mehmed II. And the Constantinople fall only took a month, 3 weeks, and 2 days, a total of 53 days for this place that had fought through 16 other sieges.
Had it not been taken over and they had lost it during that time frame of like 40, 50 years?
Yeah.
And then had to come back to try to basically make it what it was. It's asking a lot. It's a big ask.
Well, not to mention, you had 4 other attempted sieges that took probably a decent toll on some of your fortifications.
Yeah.
So these guys had gone out and failed enough to where they had sort of figured out your weaknesses.
That's true.
And figured out how to win the fight. And it turns out to win the fight, you got to take down the walls. And to take down the walls, you got to get the biggest fucking gun that I've ever heard of.
That's the other thing, too, is none of these sieges have been successful. You don't know that they're going to, when they come back the third time, it's like, these guys don't fucking learn. These walls are fucking impenetrable. We don't need to improve upon them. We've cracked the code. We figured out the best way to do this, and it's worked up to this point. So it's not like you're constantly evolving your defenses either.
And just like in golf, if you're swinging a club and you're not making a great connection, it's not going far enough, what do?
Bigger club face.
Yep, you get a bigger club. And they got the driver of all cannons, this thing called the basilic. And not to mention, the Ottoman forces that rolled in for this, 100,000 to 130,000 Ottoman forces rolled up on Constantinople. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So if you can get in with that many people, it's not going to take long. I think at this time they had said the population had dwindled from around its peak at 50 or 500,000 to right around 50,000 when the siege happened. So your forces are very few and far between, because that's not, I think forces might have been like 10,000 at that point.
The other thing too, man, if you're constantly getting fucking, these sieges keep happening, yeah, your city is defending itself, but like, at what point, like as a family, as a business and all this stuff, with the world also expanding and becoming more accessible, are you like, man, like every fucking 10 years, the fucking Ottomans are trying to knock down the door. I don't know how much longer this place, let's maybe get away from the Ottomans to see if we can have,
Either that or just like, could it be worse than what they're doing to us? Maybe they're nicer once they actually get control of this place.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They resign themselves to maybe new leadership's on its way. So yeah, they had 100,000 to 130,000 Ottoman forces, and then this thing called the basilic. They had a bunch of other cannons too, but this basilic was incredible. The basilic was a cannon that measured 24 feet or 7.32 meters long. It was 2.5 feet or 76 centimeters in diameter. It was able to fire a 1,200 pound or 540 kilo cannonball. And these weren't steel cannonballs back then. They were made of like granite or any sort of marble, anything that they could fashion into a circle to fire out of this thing.
You couldn't do like limestone or anything like that, because what you'd basically be doing is you're firing a limestone cannonball at a limestone wall that's much thicker and tougher than the cannonball.
Well, and the pressure on the limestone, it would be like birdshot coming out of a shotgun as opposed to
that
like
might have been fucking deadly. They'd like load the fucking limestone.
Yeah, but there's a chance that the limestone wouldn't be as effective.
No, that's what I meant. So
spread.
Of course you're making these out of, and again, you're chipping and making these circular fucking things of granite and everything, and just firing these things at a wall. I asked you, did you ever look at what the actual method was for casting these things?
Yeah. So.
Like, think of, like, what materials you have. So you're using, this is still Bronze Age?
Yep.
Okay, so you're still in the Bronze Age. So bronze being a weaker metal, you have to essentially make these things thicker and bigger to be able to fire these cannonballs. And you don't have the ability really, because that's the strongest metal that you have, to then have anything else in which to make a mold to make these single cast, because it's not like you can take two sides of it and fuse them together. They didn't have the technology to do that.
Well, they did, but the pressure being exerted from the firing of the
That's what I mean,
cannonball would
safely.
just
You
shear
couldn't
it.
do it.
Yeah,
Yes,
no,
exactly.
not a chance.
They could do it, but not in a way that would make it successful. So you have to make a cast to be able to pour this, but then at the same time have something in the middle to keep the shape of the fucking cylinder or the barrel that you're going to be utilizing. So, okay, so how did they fucking do this?
Using bronze. Bronze is a mixture of copper and tin, so you have to melt all that down, and the casting was going to be so big that they couldn't just like make a frame and then put sand into it. They had to actually dig a hole in the ground in order to make this casting.
I would assume straight down.
It had to be straight down, which again, 24 feet into the ground's a hell of a pit to dig. That's pretty fucking far.
And only that big around.
Perfectly. Yeah, you'd have to figure out how to get. You'd have one guy down there shoveling, send a ladder down, bring him up. Like you're not
upside down on a rope, and then just sending buckets out behind him.
Yeah, dude, just crazy. And again, a 2.5 foot diameter area. So then you would pour the melted bronze down in. Then you would have to create a plug or something to create the barrel that Chris was talking about. I never found out how they did it. My best guess would probably be a piece of timber that they would have to coat in some sort of ceramic.
So perfectly smooth piece of timber that's almost uniform the entire way up, because you can't have it end up going and being smaller or bigger. You would have to try to get it as perfect as you could.
Yeah.
Ceramically coat that essentially, or like with pottery, things like that, to get it also as smooth and as uniform as possible.
But to make the wood burn proof so it'll set in there long enough to make a casting.
To harden. And then have to lower that directly straight down because you couldn't have a tilted or cockeyed barrel on there, and then remove that after it had cast and everything, and then somehow make it to where you had a hole in it to then where you could load it with gunpowder to fire and ignite the propellant behind the ball. Like, the fucking technology to do that is fucking insane. But how it could only be fired how many times?
3 times a day they could only fire it. Yeah, it was 3 times a day because the heat would be so much from the blast. This thing could send one of those almost a mile away. It could send it 1.5 kilometers or a mile away. It could fire a 1,200 pound cannonball. And they said that this is where I feel like, since this was version 1, when you were talking about making everything straight and perfect, they didn't really have it down because they said this thing was wildly inaccurate. So to get a direct hit,
you'd be getting as close as you could to it and everything. They said that between the shots, because they could fire so infrequently, that they almost had time in a lot of cases to repair the damage that had been done to the wall by the time that they could get ready to fire additional shots and actually score a hit. But I mean, imagine seeing something that big, hearing that sound, seeing what it did to the wall, and just being like, well, we've never seen this shit. Can the walls hold up to this? So big that these things had to actually be transported by, how many was it? It was dragged by 90 oxen and 400 men.
It's just huge, dude. And
think of like the trial and error for this, because guess what? Once they took them out in the field, they had to find out at some point that 3 was that magic number. How many times did it take with guys standing next to that thing where it exploded and killed everyone inside and been like, how many was that? They're like, that was number 5, sir. That was 5 shots. And he's like, 5's the number. Then all of a sudden a bunch of them blow up at 5 and they're like, okay, I guess it's got to be 4. 4 is the number.
Yeah, dude, it's to know all that stuff. They said that they had to use olive oil to cool it. And
back to the olive oil thing,
if
or
you
vinegar or whatever.
Yeah, that was probably like, well, water just goes ahead and turns into steam and doesn't really cool it. Oil will stay on there. What do we have a lot of? We're in the region of olive oil. We'll just try olive oil.
To think that it was so abundant. You ever walk into fucking Costco and look at the olive oil and being like, oh my God, and they were just dumping this shit on fucking cannons?
You're paying $15-$20 for an amount of olive oil that's almost embarrassingly small. And they had it plentifully to be able to do it. But the gun, it had a lifespan. It only had 6 weeks. You only needed 53 days for the siege, but 6 weeks is about its lifespan. But the bad thing about this, and this is where things really seem like they could have gone a different direction had money been a little bit differently. There was this guy named Orban. He was a Hungarian cannon engineer. He first went down to Constantinople and talked to Constantine the 11th and was like, hey, man, I can build you a cannon that will protect this place from anything. He's like, we're already pretty impenetrable. I mean, we just fought back the Ottomans 4 times.
What are we firing at with this thing?
Yeah.
We're firing from, we're in the walls. Mm-hmm. We're not looking to go ahead and like, there's no walls outside of us that are from an enemy. Like we're good here.
And they just did not have the money. The money, I think, was the biggest thing, because I think after 4 sieges and seeing what that had happened, they were probably like, we need maybe a plan B here.
Orban's like, these guys got to be desperate.
And they just didn't have the money for it. So after he offered it to them, he went down to the other side, because that's what you do when you're an arms dealer. If you can't support one side, you support the other side.
There's arms dealers.
Yeah.
Back then, that are
that's what he was.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was. And the thing too is like, the whole wall isn't going to be up to snuff of what it used to be throughout the years. There are parts that had fallen into disrepair that were no longer, it's a pretty vast wall. You have a smaller resource of people to maintain it and everything. So you're not setting up in front of the strongest parts of the wall and being like, we're going to knock this down on principle. You're going to the weakest parts, and then you're able to end up knocking down that with the cannons, or at least creating enough of a hole where you can get your troops in to take the city. You're not have to have the whole thing collapse. You just have to get a foothold in there.
Well, Mehmed was a very smart man, because not only did he have the basilic firing the big cannon, but he had also purchased a bunch of smaller cannons that were able to fire in between those big ones.
Keep them on edge, not give them time to get their footing.
But that sweet, sweet underbelly that you were talking about, that very, very important harbor that was protected by that chain that just seems like the most brilliantly complex thing that you could ever build out there. How did people get across pieces of land between bodies of water?
I don't get this, man, because the ships that they were able to take over, I don't know how you transport those over land. They ended up doing that, and what they did is they sailed past the Golden Horn, and they sailed further up the Bosphorus Straits, and then basically got to a point where they weren't, being harassed by the enemy. Took out a bunch of ships. I think they said there were like 10 galleys that they took out in some barges. They had to transport them all the way across to where the river was that fed into the Golden Horn. They portaged those all the way across, got further up the Golden Horn, put them back in, and then sailed in behind the chain, and were basically able to attack the harbor that way. But how the fuck do you move boats like that? Like galleys, I'm not saying galleys were huge like they were like man of war or ships like that, but it's a galley, and that phrase comes from a larger version of ships that could carry a lot of people.
Yeah, well, and you already have 90 oxen tied up and pulling that cannon.
Yeah.
So you're not loading a bunch of oxen onto a ship that already has a finite amount of people. Mm-hmm. For every oxen you put on a ship is 10 other guys that you could put on there. So it's men that are carrying these things across this stretch of land.
So it evidently falls to the siege. City was pretty much half deserted at that point. Like Adam said earlier in the podcast, at its peak, the population here was around 500,000, so you can really see how it was reduced and kind of a shell of its former self, but still insanely desired for its strategic purposes and almost just for its mystique about the city and what it symbolizes, the capital at that point of the Roman Empire. What do you do if you capture the city that was the capital of the Roman Empire? You have this magnificent city. You then make it the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And the orthodoxy was replaced with the Islamic rule. Mehmed issued orders that Muslim, Christians, and Jews should resettle the city. And then that beautiful Hagia Sophia, they ended up turning that into a mosque, right?
Yep.
And so that's kind of where Adam was talking about. Stuff gets covered up, but they saw how beautiful that thing was, and they're like, we're not tearing this shit down. We're just going to use it for what we want to use it for.
Well, it's also pretty fucking cool that it was kind of like the Muslims might have followed the way that Constantine set things up. Because when you issue the order that it's going to be a Muslim state, but you still want Christians and Jews there, you're still opening your doors to other religions.
Yeah.
Like
you understand that there's a strength in the diversity of those people. They're going to contribute differently, and they're also going to make your city prosper, because then you're not pigeonholing yourself to just one group for trade, export, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, time really plays a role on how you feel about other people being in your city, as we're going to talk about here in a second.
Well, it ends up staying in the hands of the Ottomans as part of the Ottoman Empire until basically the end of World War I, when the Ottomans made the super poor choice by aligning themselves with the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And during that time frame, once the Ottomans did lose, they or was it what was the court that took place after World War One? Geneva, right?
I thought Geneva.
Oh no, it was Treaty of Versailles.
Yes.
So the Treaty of Versailles and all that kind of stuff, the Ottomans were committed in the Armenian genocide, killing 800,000 to 1.2 Armenians. So not good there.
No, the Armenian genocide is going to definitely be its own episode, and it's going to be a bummer, but that's a lot of people to kill.
It's one of those things that you never hear about during World War One. It's never, because it's always the focus of the fucking no man's land and all that kind of stuff, and up in Germany and against the Austro-Hungarians, you don't realize what was going on in these other countries, these fucking atrocities.
Yeah, and to think that I'm sure in Europe that's probably more widely known, but I had never heard of the Armenian genocide until I was in college. I mean, that's a pretty big number to not hear about. Maybe it's because in grade school they want to keep you a little bit sheltered from shit, but that's a pretty big loss of life for a world.
Yep. Well, the Turkish War for Independence takes place in 1919 to 1922. It ends up abolishing the Sultanate, and in 1923, on October 6th, that's actually known as Liberation Day of Istanbul. And I think once it was taken over by the Ottoman Empire, that's when they changed the name to Istanbul. Is that correct?
I thought it was when they were liberated, because once the Ottomans lost and they lost control of Constantinople is when they changed the name to Istanbul, because it wasn't held under Ottoman rule.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's a city that has had way more ups than downs. It seems like it's traded hands in the span of like stuff in the Mediterranean, that whole area, changing hands only 2 or 3 times, as essentially mythic as this city was and as important this city was. That's pretty fucking
It's a big win.
Impressive, yeah.
Yeah, in the numbers, Istanbul doesn't come across my radar a whole lot. I think it's partially because the only time you hear about Turkey is when that Erdogan guy is doing something kind of crazy. But Istanbul, like you said earlier, it's got a population now of 15,655,924. That's a lot of fucking people.
Largest fucking population in Europe, man.
Yeah, and the 15th largest population, or metro population in the world.
They said it's one of the largest, as far as like shipping goes. It's one of the largest cities for shipping in the world too. So I mean,
it has to be. And it's that strategic position that has played a role.
Dude, like, I don't know if any existing city. So you have like Alexandria that we did, a long time ago, and you kind of compared it to Alexandria, kind of like, I think are you still on Team Alexandria?
I talk myself in and out of it. The reason that I talk myself in and out of it is because Alexandria, initially, the one major has to be the cooler city, is because it's Alexander's city. He named it and all that. But there was, during the span of time that it happened, when you have the philosophy schools and all of the learning and everything like that that's going on in Alexandria, it's not happening anywhere else. There's no libraries like that. So fast forward to this time now, though, we've come so far in education that this being the crown city, all of the shit that they were talking about at the Philosophy Center in Alexandria is now being taught to more people because there's more of an audience that's showing up to do it. So it's like where that stuff was kind of new intelligence back then, it's still the same intelligence. It's just so much older now that it's being taught more commonplace, which is a favor of Constantinople being the cooler city.
Well, one thing that I kind of want to leave the episode with is what the fall of Constantinople kind of lent to the rest of the world, and I thought this was really cool, and this is a perfect segue into a future episode. But when Constantinople essentially fell to the Ottoman Empire, at that point, that was the end of the Byzantine Empire. So it went from 330 AD, when it was named Constantinople, to 1453. So the Byzantine Empire lasted for about 1,100 years. That's fucking nuts. That's taking place kind of closer to halfway, if not past halfway, of the actual Roman Empire, because it was that as well. It was just named the Byzantine because of the region to separate it. But for 1,100 years to fucking last as an empire like that is fucking nuts.
That's impressive.
When it did fall, it was one of the catalysts, if not the major catalyst, for the Renaissance, because it was such a central city, and that was the capital of Rome. All of those artists and those thinkers and everyone were in Constantinople because that was where it was happening. And when it was taken over and conquered, all those people went back to the place they had known before, in the friendly place, and that was going to be Rome. And all of those people coming back, they said that's one of the catalysts when those artists and intellectuals all flooded back into the city at one time. There was such a concentration that it led to the start of the Renaissance period.
That's a pretty big feather to have in a cap for a city.
Oh, yeah. That the fall of your city leads to the Renaissance.
Yeah. Turns out that it wasn't just rats scurrying off of ships. It was every brilliant mind.
Yeah, exactly.
that was headed home.
All right, man. You got anything else?
No, this was a great call. This was a Professor Chris suggestion, and I had no idea. I knew that this place was Constantinople, and it turned into Istanbul, and for the history and everything that happened prior to is incredibly cool, but the fact that it was just liberated from the Ottoman Empire and then changed into Istanbul.
A little over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a new city that's the largest city in Europe was just changed hands and changed names.
Yep. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on another episode. Remember, follow those socials, rate, review, subscribe, all that good shit, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.